My name, I am Charmaine, 35 years old, and somehow still healing from wounds my family inflicted. As a successful software developer, I escaped their toxicity but maintained occasional contact. Last Sunday, they invited me to an upscale brunch to catch up. Between mimosas and avocado toast, my mother leaned forward, smirking. You know, Charmaine, you are lucky we even include you. Pity goes a long way. I simply sipped my coffee and smiled. That night, I logged in, disabled every family credit account, and emailed my lawyer about selling the cabin. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth growing up in Fairfield. Connecticut meant privilege to outsiders, but inside our sprawling colonial home, emotional coldness permeated every corner. Our four-bedroom house with its manicured lawn and heated swimming pool was a fortress of expectations I could never quite meet. My childhood bedroom painted pale blue. At my mother Elaine's insistence, despite my preference for green, became my sanctuary and prison. From elementary school through high school, I maintained straight as joined honor societies and exhausted myself trying to win a single word of genuine praise. But none of my achievements ever mattered because I was not my younger brother Trey. That brunch was merely the appetizer for the true breaking point, which arrived just a few nights later. My father James had summoned the entire family to an exclusive $200 a plate steakhouse in downtown Atlanta to celebrate Trey. We had all relocated down south years ago, trading Connecticut colonials for Atlanta high-rises, but the toxic family dynamics had traveled right alongside us. I sat at the end of a long mahogany table, the heavy scent of seared ribeye and expensive red wine filling the private dining room. I wore a simple black dress and a pair of sensible flats. I have always preferred to keep a low profile. My family mistook my modesty for failure. They assumed my career as a software developer was just some mid-level IT job. They had no idea that I was a silent partner in an aggressive venture capital firm, and they certainly had no idea that I was the phantom bankrolling my brother's entire life. Trey sat at the head of the table wearing a tailored velvet tuxedo jacket that cost more than my first car. Next to him was his wife, Vanessa. Vanessa was the quintessential fake influencer. She carried a bright orange designer handbag that she made sure was perfectly angled toward the ambient lighting for her social media photos. She spent the entire first hour of the dinner looking down her nose at me, whispering to my mother Elaine and letting out these sharp, condescending giggles. Then came the moment that sealed their fate. My father clinked his crystal glass with a silver spoon. The table fell silent. James stood up, his chest puffed out with absolute pride. He smoothed his expensive tie and looked at Trey with the kind of pure, unadulterated adoration I had craved my entire childhood. "Let us raise a glass," my father boomed, his voice echoing off the wood-paneled walls. "To Trey, a true self-made man, a shining example of Black excellence. In just 2 years, he has built his luxury car rental business, Trey's Elite, entirely from scratch. He did it without any handouts, without any shortcuts, and without asking anyone for a single dime." Elaine clapped her hands together, her diamond rings flashing in the light. She looked over at me with a smug, razor-sharp smile. "Take notes, Charmaine," she said loudly enough for the waiter pouring water to hear. "This is what real ambition looks like. Maybe if you applied yourself, you could trade in that beat-up old sedan of yours and actually make something of your life." Vanessa chimed in, right on cue. "Oh, leave her alone, Elaine. Not everyone is built for the high life. Some people are just destined to be regular workers." I did not argue. I did not raise my voice. I did not even frown. I simply took a slow, deliberate sip of my sparkling water. The irony was so thick it was almost suffocating. Trey's Elite was nothing but a hollow shell. My self-made brother had not built an empire. He had built a house of cards on top of my credit score. 2 years ago, when he was crying about being totally broke and facing eviction, I quietly opened an $80,000 commercial line of credit to get him started. I made him an authorized user under my corporate account. The agreement was that he would pay me back within 6 months. He never paid back a single cent. He used my money to lease his flashy fleet of cars, pay for his tailored suits, and fund Vanessa's designer lifestyle. Underneath the heavy linen tablecloth, I pulled out my phone. The screen cast a faint glow on my lap. I bypassed my lock screen and opened my secure banking application. My finger hovered over the account's dashboard. I looked up at Trey, who was currently bragging to my father about how he was negotiating a massive contract to chauffeur visiting celebrities. He was completely oblivious to the fact that his entire existence was tethered to the device in my hand. I tapped on the business credit line. The balance was maxed out, $79,800. I navigated to the Authorized Users tab. Trey's name sat there in bold letters. I did not feel a shred of guilt. I did not feel any obligation to protect them anymore. My mother's words echoed in my head. Pity goes a long way. I tapped the red button labeled Revoke Authorized User. A confirmation prompt popped up on the screen. Are you sure you want to revoke this user? All associated cards will be immediately deactivated. I pressed confirm. The screen refreshed and Trey's name vanished into the digital void. I slid my phone back into my purse and picked up my fork, cutting into my asparagus as if I had not just detonated a financial bomb right under their feet. The dinner carried on. They ordered the most expensive items on the menu: Wagyu beef butter, poached lobster tails, truffle macaroni and cheese, and 4 bottles of vintage wine. They laughed, they toasted, and they continued to throw passive-aggressive insults my way. I absorbed every single one of them, perfectly content in my silence. 2 hours later, the damage was done. The waiter, a polite young man in a crisp white apron, approached the table carrying a black leather folio. He placed it directly in front of James. My father waved him off and pointed to Trey. "Give it to the man of the hour," James said proudly. Trey smiled a wide, arrogant grin and reached into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a sleek, heavy metal credit card. It hit the silver tray with a loud clink. "Keep the change," my brother told the waiter smoothly. The waiter took the card and walked away. The family resumed their boasting. Vanessa was busy recording a video for her followers, panning her phone across the messy plates of expensive food. But exactly 3 minutes later, the waiter returned. He was not smiling anymore. He leaned down and whispered something quietly into Trey's ear. Trey's confident expression faltered. He let out a nervous chuckle. "Must be a security hold," he said loudly, clearly trying to save face in front of our parents. "It happens when you spend as much as I do. The bank just wants to make sure my card was not stolen." He reached into his wallet and handed the waiter a second card. "A backup corporate card." The waiter nodded and walked away again. This time it only took 60 seconds for the waiter to return. He did not whisper. His voice was polite but carried clearly across the quiet dining room. "Sir, this card has also been declined. The system is showing that the account has been disabled." Vanessa stopped recording. Her phone dropped slightly. "What do you mean, disabled?" she snapped at the waiter. "Try it again." "You probably swiped it wrong. I swiped it 3 times, ma'am," the waiter replied, keeping his professional composure. "If you have another form of payment, the total is $4,270. A heavy, suffocating silence dropped over the table. James looked at Trey. His brow furrowed in confusion. Trey was frantically tapping on his phone, his face draining of all color. "I cannot log into the portal," Trey muttered, panic rising in his voice. "It says my access has been revoked." Elaine looked horrified. James immediately turned his attention to me. His eyes hardened into that familiar commanding glare. "Charmaine," he barked, his voice laced with expectation. "Put this on your card. Trey is just having a banking glitch. You can cover your own brother for 1 night." I looked at my father. I looked at the panic-stricken face of my brother. I looked at Vanessa, who was gripping her orange handbag like a life preserver. I picked up my linen napkin, folded it neatly, and placed it on the table. Then I unzipped my small clutch and pulled out a single crisp $50 bill. I set it down right next to my empty water glass. "I am paying for my salad," I said, my voice completely steady and devoid of any emotion. "What is wrong with you, Elaine?" hissed, her eyes darting nervously toward the waiter. "Do not embarrass us. Pay the bill." I stood up from my chair and smoothed the front of my dress. I looked directly into Trey's terrified eyes. "There is no banking glitch, Trey. I just disabled the $80,000 credit line you have been draining for 2 years. The self-made fund is officially closed." Trey's jaw dropped. Vanessa gasped loudly, covering her mouth with her hand. James slammed his fist on the table, rattling the silverware. "You cannot do this," my father yelled, forgetting all about his precious public image. "I can, and I just did," I replied calmly. "Congratulations on your success, Trey. I am sure a self-made black entrepreneur like yourself can figure out how to pay for his own stake." I turned my back on them and walked out of the private room. I did not look back as my father shouted my name, or as Vanessa started to cry. I walked through the elegant main dining area, stepped out into the warm Atlanta night air, and handed my ticket to the valet. As I drove away in my supposedly beat-up sedan, leaving them trapped with the restaurant manager, I felt something I had not felt in 35 years: absolute unbreakable freedom. The morning sun filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my penthouse apartment in Buckhead. I poured myself a cup of dark roast coffee and settled onto my plush leather sofa. My phone buzzed on the glass coffee table with an automated alert from my private bank. The corporate credit line I had severed the night before had officially triggered a system-wide default for all of Trey's business accounts. Because my $80,000 limit was the only liquid collateral backing his luxury vehicle leases. The commercial dealership's automated risk management software had instantly flagged his corporate account for immediate repossession. I smiled, taking a slow sip of my hot coffee. I did not need to be physically present at my father's massive megachurch this morning to witness the glorious fallout of my actions. I had a front row seat right on my phone, courtesy of my incredibly vain sister-in-law. I opened the Instagram application and tapped on Vanessa's profile. Her profile picture featured her draped dramatically over the hood of a white Porsche, looking like a discount reality television star, desperate for relevance. The glowing purple ring around her avatar indicated she was broadcasting live to her followers. I joined the stream as an anonymous viewer, ensuring my name would not pop up in the viewer list. The screen filled with the bright, sunny exterior of James's sprawling church campus, located in the most upscale suburb of Atlanta. My father was the head pastor of a congregation that catered almost exclusively to the city's wealthy elite. Image was everything to him, and poverty was treated like a moral failing. Vanessa held her phone high above her head, panning slowly across the pristine parking lot before flipping the camera to show her heavily contoured face and oversized designer sunglasses. "Happy Sunday, my beautiful followers," Vanessa cooed into the microphone, flashing a blindingly white smile. "We are out here at the sanctuary getting ready for an amazing service. We have some very special VIP guest speakers flying in from Los Angeles today to minister to the congregation. And of course, Trey's Elite is handling all of their ground transportation because we only deal with the best." She flipped the camera again, zooming in on the designated VIP drop-off zone right near the main entrance of the massive brick church. There, gleaming under the bright morning sun, were 3 massive black-on-black Cadillac Escalades. They were freshly detailed tires shining, looking like a heavily guarded presidential motorcade. My mother Elaine stepped into the frame. She was wearing a tailored lavender suit and a matching wide-brimmed hat that practically screamed arrogance. She spotted Vanessa filming and immediately puffed out her chest, walking over to the vehicles with a regal stride. Elaine patted the hood of the lead Escalade like it was a prized racehorse she had personally bred. "Good morning, viewers," Elaine said, speaking directly into the lens. "We are just out here making sure everything is absolutely perfect for the visiting bishop and his entire entourage. My son Trey always provides the absolute best luxury experience for the kingdom. Excellence is in our blood. We do not do anything halfway in this family." I watched the viewer count climb steadily past 2,000 people. Vanessa's followers were eating it up, leaving hundreds of comments praising their blessed life and congratulating Trey on his booming business. Vanessa flipped the camera back to herself, playfully tossing her long hair over her shoulder. "You hear that, guys? When you work hard and build your own empire from the ground up, the financial blessings just overflow. No handouts, just pure hustle and grind. Support Black-owned businesses, y'all. I checked my heavy gold wristwatch. It was exactly 9:45 in the morning. Service was scheduled to let out in exactly 15 minutes, which meant the massive congregation would be pouring out into the courtyard just in time for the main event. I took another sip of my coffee, kicked my feet up onto the table, and watched the digital screen intently. Suddenly, the serene background noise of pleasant church chatter and distant choir music was completely interrupted by a loud, heavy mechanical rumbling. Vanessa frowned, looking quickly over her shoulder. The camera shook slightly as she adjusted her grip on the phone. "What is that horrible noise?" she muttered, taking a few steps away from the parked Escalades. Into the frame rolled a massive, heavy-duty commercial tow truck. It was painted bright yellow and covered in scratches, standing out like a massive sore thumb against the manicured green lawns and shiny luxury vehicles of the church parking lot. But it was not alone. Right behind it came a second massive tow truck, and then a third. The loud diesel engines roared as they drove past the standard parking rows and pulled directly into the VIP drop-off zone, aggressively boxing in all three of the pristine Cadillac Escalades. Vanessa's face went completely pale. The livestream chat instantly exploded with question marks, gasps, and laughing face emojis. "Excuse me, Vanessa," shouted her polished influencer voice, completely vanishing, replaced by a harsh, panicked shriek. "You cannot park those ugly trucks here. This is a private VIP lane for the church. Move them right now." The driver of the first tow truck hopped out of his elevated cab. He was a tall, burly man wearing a neon high-visibility vest and carrying a thick metal clipboard. He completely ignored Vanessa's screaming and walked straight to the lead Escalade, quickly checking the vehicle identification number visible through the lower corner of the windshield. "Looks like a perfect match." He yelled back to the other tow truck drivers, "Hook them up, boys! We have a default order on all three vehicles." Vanessa dropped her arm, the camera lens pointing wildly at the blue sky, and then the concrete pavement before she snatched it back up to eye level. Her perfectly curated broadcast was rapidly turning into a public relations nightmare broadcast live to thousands. "You need to leave this property right now," Elaine's voice screeched loudly from off-camera. "Do you have any idea whose church this is? Do you know who my son is?" I heard the heavy, unforgiving clanking of thick metal chains and the loud whine of hydraulic lifts engaging. The repo men were not wasting a single second of their time. They were seasoned professionals, and they had a very specific job to do. At that exact moment, the massive carved oak doors of the church sanctuary swung wide open. Hundreds of well-dressed churchgoers began flooding out into the courtyard, adjusting their suits and greeting one another. The timing could not possibly have been more perfect if I had scripted it myself. Right at the very front of the massive crowd was my father, James, walking proudly shoulder to shoulder with the highly anticipated visiting bishop from Los Angeles. James was gesturing grandly with his hands, no doubt bragging about the luxury VIP transport currently waiting for them at the curb. His grand gesture completely froze in midair. Through Vanessa's chaotic and shaky camera work, I saw James's face contort in absolute horror. The lead tow truck was already lifting the front wheels of the first heavy Escalade right off the ground. "What in God's name is going on out here?" James bellowed, his booming pastoral voice cutting sharply through the murmuring courtyard crowd. Trey came sprinting out of the sanctuary doors, his velvet suit jacket flapping wildly behind him. He looked like a man who had just watched his entire house catch on fire. He bolted past the confused bishop, shoved past James, and threw his body dangerously between the second tow truck and the middle Escalade. "Stop! Stop! The trucks! Right now!" Trey screamed, waving his arms frantically in the air. "There is a huge mistake. I paid the leases. You cannot take these cars." The repo man with this clipboard calmly held up a thick stack of printed legal paperwork. "No mistake at all, buddy. We got an automated ping from the bank at midnight. Your corporate line of credit was officially terminated. Without that required collateral, your commercial lease agreements went into immediate default. The bank ordered an emergency repossession due to the high flight risk of the assets. Step away from the vehicle right now before I call the local police." Trey's face turned a violent, sickening shade of ash gray. He looked around wildly like a trapped animal. The entire congregation was watching the spectacle in stunned silence. The wealthy visiting bishop looked deeply uncomfortable, whispering something quietly to his personal assistant, and slowly backing away from my father. James looked like he was going to have a massive heart attack right there on the pristine church steps. The flawless, untouchable image he had spent decades meticulously cultivating was being violently shredded in broad daylight. "Do something, Trey," Elaine wailed loudly, clutching her expensive lavender hat to her chest, as if she might faint on the concrete. "Pay the man right now. Give him your black card. Show them we have the money." "I tried," Trey yelled back at her, his voice cracking violently with absolute panic. "The cards are blocked. All of them are completely declined." Charmaine cut me off. The sudden mention of my name made Elaine gasp loudly. James's eyes widened in shock, the crushing reality of last night's dinner finally crashing down on his shoulders. They had assumed I was bluffing at the steakhouse. They had assumed I would eventually cave and turn the money back on this morning because I had spent my entire life craving their basic approval. They had severely underestimated exactly how much their relentless cruelty had cured me of that pathetic desire. Vanessa's livestream was still running, capturing every single humiliating second of the ordeal. The comments were scrolling so incredibly fast, they were just a blurry white block of text. People were eagerly tagging local Atlanta gossip blogs. Mentions of viral video sites were popping up repeatedly. Vanessa finally looked down at her digital screen, realizing with sheer horror that thousands of strangers were watching her husband get publicly stripped of his fake luxury empire. "Turn it off!" Trey screamed aggressively at his wife, finally noticing the glowing ring light attached to her expensive phone case. "Turn that stupid phone off right now." Vanessa fumbled clumsily with the screen, her long acrylic nails clicking frantically against the thick glass. The camera view spun wildly out of control, capturing one last chaotic shot of a black Escalade being hoisted unceremoniously into the air before the feed abruptly cut to black. "The broadcast has ended," the screen read in stark white letters. I locked my phone and tossed it casually onto the sofa cushion next to me. The heavy silence in my apartment was deeply and profoundly satisfying. The so-called self-made man had just been completely unmade in front of his entire world. And this spectacular public humiliation was only the very first wave of consequences they were going to face. What they did not know, and what they were about to find out the hard way, was that Trey's financial rot went much deeper than a few bounced luxury car leases. He had made a desperate, catastrophic choice to keep his fake business afloat, and the legal evidence of that terrible choice was currently sitting in a heavily encrypted file on my personal laptop. I finished the rest of my coffee, savoring the rich, dark flavor on my tongue. It was going to be a very busy and highly entertaining week. By Monday morning, the smear campaign was in full swing. Vanessa had wasted absolutely no time weaponizing her social media following to control the narrative. I woke up to dozens of notifications from well-meaning friends who had forwarded me her latest Instagram Live broadcast. She had completely dropped the glamorous influencer persona from the day before. Instead, she was sitting on the floor of her walk-in closet, wearing an oversized gray hoodie and no makeup. She was actively squeezing out fake tears, dabbing at her dry eyes with a crumpled tissue. She had titled the video "The Pain of Toxic Family" and "The Attack on Black Excellence." I sat at my kitchen island, sipping a fresh cup of coffee, and watched her performance with morbid fascination. "Y'all, my heart is just completely broken today," Vanessa whimpered into the camera, her voice trembling with perfectly rehearsed fragility. "I never wanted to bring private family business onto the internet, but I have to speak my truth. Yesterday at church we were attacked, and the worst part is the attack came from inside our own family. My husband Trey is a hard-working, self-made black man. He has sacrificed everything to build a legitimate empire, but his older sister has always been deeply jealous of his success. She is a miserable, lonely woman who cannot stand to see her younger brother thriving." She paused to let out a dramatic sigh, glancing at the scrolling comments to ensure her audience was eating it up. Because she is single and unhappy, she decided to sabotage his business accounts, right before our biggest VIP contract of the year. Vanessa continued, her tone shifting from sad to righteously angry. She used her connections to freeze his assets illegally, just to embarrass him in front of our entire congregation. It is that classic crabs in a barrel mentality. You try to build generational wealth, and your own flesh and blood tries to drag you back down. Please pray for my husband. He is devastated. The comments under the video were a cesspool of misplaced sympathy and aggressive outrage. Strangers were calling me a bitter spinster, a toxic hazard, and a disgrace to the culture. They were praising Trey as a king who did not deserve such betrayal. Vanessa was soaking up every single drop of validation, carefully building a protective shield of public opinion around their impending financial ruin. But the public performance was only half of their strategy. The private assault was happening simultaneously in my text messages. My mother Elaine had taken it upon herself to mobilize the entire extended family against me. She had created a brand new group chat intentionally adding me so I could see every horrible thing being said. Elaine fired off paragraph after paragraph of blistering guilt trips. "You have humiliated this family in the house of the Lord." She wrote her words practically screaming through the screen. "Your father had to apologize to the visiting bishop. You are a spiteful, hateful girl. Trey is out here trying to provide for his wife. And you pull the rug out from under him because you are envious of his marriage and his ambition. You are dead to me until you fix this and apologize to your brother." My aunts and uncles, who only ever knew the fake version of Trey that my parents peddled, chimed in with their own messages of disgust. They quoted Bible verses about forgiveness and family loyalty. They told me I needed to seek counseling for my deep-seated resentment. Not a single one of them asked for my side of the story. Not a single one of them wondered why a self-made millionaire's entire fleet of cars could be repossessed just because his sister pressed a button on her phone. They preferred the comfortable lie over the ugly truth. I did not reply to a single message. I simply silenced the chat, turned off my phone screen, and went into my bedroom to get dressed for work. I did not feel a single ounce of guilt. I only felt a cold, sharp sense of clarity. Let them talk. Let them spin their pathetic little web of lies. They were about to learn that social media sympathy does not pay off corporate debt. An hour later, I was sitting in the main boardroom of my venture capital firm, located on the 40th floor of a sleek glass tower overlooking the sprawling Atlanta skyline. This was my true sanctuary. There were no fake influencers here. There were no hypocritical pastors or golden children. There was only cold, hard, undeniable capital. I was wearing a sharp, custom-tailored navy suit. I sat at the head of the long mahogany table reviewing a $50 million term sheet for a new tech acquisition. My partners were quietly discussing the valuation metrics, the room filled with the hushed, serious energy of people who actually moved markets. My secure private line buzzed in my pocket. It was a completely separate device from my personal phone, a number known only to my closest business associates and my wealth management team. I pulled it out and looked at the caller identification. It was Julian, my senior private banker at a massive global financial institution. Julian managed my 8-figure investment portfolio and handled all of my complex financial instruments. If he was calling me directly during market hours, it was not for a casual chat. "Excuse me for a moment, gentlemen," I said smoothly to my partners standing up from the table. I walked out of the boardroom and stepped into my private soundproof corner office. I closed the heavy glass door behind me and answered the call. "Good morning, Julian. What do you have for me?" "Good morning, Charmaine," Julian replied, his voice uncharacteristically tense. "I apologize for interrupting your morning, but we have a highly critical situation that requires your immediate attention. My fraud detection team just flagged a massive anomaly on your personal credit profile." I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window, looking down at the tiny cars navigating the city streets below. "Explain," I said calmly. At approximately 6 o'clock this morning, a commercial bridge loan was forcefully pushed through a secondary shadow lending network. Julian explained, his words clipped and precise. "The loan is for exactly $250,000. The originating entity is Trey's Elite Luxury Rentals. However, because the business has zero liquid assets and a newly registered default status, the lender required a high net worth guarantor to secure the funds." I felt a sudden icy chill drop into the pit of my stomach. The puzzle pieces rapidly snapped together in my mind. Trey was desperate. When the repo truck showed up at the church yesterday, he realized his entire fraudulent life was collapsing. He needed a massive injection of cash immediately to pay off the commercial leases and get those cars back before his fake empire crumbled completely. But no reputable bank would ever lend money to a business with his catastrophic financial history. So he went to a predatory shadow lender, a desperate, unregulated loan shark operating disguised as a corporate entity. Are you telling me my brother listed me as the guarantor on a $250,000 predatory loan? I asked, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Worse, Julian said grimly. He did not just list you, he signed for you. The loan was electronically executed and funded almost instantly because it was secured against your pristine credit rating and verified global assets. The interest rate is a predatory 35%. I have already locked down all of your primary accounts to prevent any direct capital drain, but the legal contract is fully registered in the federal banking system. Charmaine, somebody forged your signature on a legally binding financial instrument. Send me the documents right now, I demanded. I just sent the encrypted file to your private server, Julian confirmed. Do you want me to initiate a federal fraud protocol? This is a severe criminal offense. I walked over to my desk, my heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. I opened my laptop, bypassed the biometric security scan, and accessed my private server. The file from Julian was sitting right at the top of my inbox. I downloaded the heavy PDF document and opened it. My eyes scanned past the dense legal jargon, the exorbitant interest rates, and the brutal default penalties. I scrolled directly to the final page of the contract. There it was, my name, Charmaine Wilson, printed boldly on the guarantor line, and right below it, an electronic signature. It was not a bad forgery. In fact, it was a near-perfect digital replication of my actual handwriting. I stared at the screen, my mind racing back through years of financial interactions with my family. Then I realized exactly how he had done it. 3 years ago. When Trey was first trying to register his limited liability company, I had physically signed a character reference document for his state business license. He had kept that original document, scanned it in high resolution, and digitally traced my exact signature to paste onto this fraudulent loan agreement. He had stolen my identity. He had risked my immaculate professional reputation, my credit, and my livelihood, all to save his pathetic rental car facade. Charmaine, Julian's voice came through the phone, pulling me back to the present. How do you want to proceed? We can have the authorities at his doorstep within the hour. This is federal wire fraud and aggravated identity theft. He is looking at a mandatory minimum sentence in federal prison if we escalate this to the authorities immediately. I stared at the forged signature on my screen. The sheer audacity of his betrayal was staggering. While his wife was crying on the internet about my supposed jealousy, and my mother was texting me hateful insults about family loyalty, the self-made golden child had actively committed a federal felony against me. He had escalated this from a petty family dispute into a massive, high-stakes criminal conspiracy. No, I said quietly, a slow, predatory smile spreading across my face. Do not call the authorities just yet, Julian. Julian sounded surprised. Charmaine, you cannot let this stand. If he defaults on this loan, they will come after your liquid assets. He will default, I replied smoothly, closing the laptop screen with a soft click, because he has absolutely no idea how to generate real revenue. But we are not going to let a random shadow lender collect the debt, and we are not going to let the police arrest him just yet. That would be far too easy. He wants to play the big-shot businessman. He wants to pretend he is an untouchable mogul. Then we will treat him like one. I want you to contact the shadow lender who originated this fraudulent loan. What exactly are you planning? Julian asked, his tone shifting from professional concern to intense curiosity. I am a venture capitalist, Julian. I specialize in hostile takeovers and distressed debt acquisitions. I said, leaning back in my leather chair, staring out at the city I had quietly conquered. I want my firm to buy this exact loan off the secondary market through a blind shell corporation. Buy the debt in full. I want to be the sole legal owner of my brother's financial soul. Set it up immediately. We are going to let him dig his own grave, and then I am going to buy the cemetery. I left my office without saying another word to my partners. The drive from my downtown high-rise to my parents' sprawling suburban estate usually took 40 minutes, but today the heavy traffic on the interstate felt entirely non-existent. My hands gripped the leather steering wheel of my sedan. On the passenger seat next to me sat a thick manila envelope containing the freshly printed copies of the forged loan documents. I had specifically requested Julian to print them on heavy, high-quality legal paper, so the weight of Trey's crime would be physically tangible. When I pulled into the wide, circular driveway of my parents' house, the sheer scale of their hypocrisy was on full display. The perfectly manicured lawn, the towering marble columns framing the front door, the massive fountain bubbling peacefully in the center of the driveway. It all looked like a picture of holy perfection. But inside, I knew it was rotting from the core. I did not bother to ring the doorbell. I unlocked the heavy mahogany front door with the spare key I still kept on my ring and pushed it open. The house was quiet, save for the faint sound of a television playing a daytime talk show in the distance. I walked purposefully through the grand foyer, my heels echoing sharply against the imported Italian marble floors. "Mom! Dad!" I called out, my voice ringing through the massive house. "I am in the kitchen." I found them sitting at the massive granite kitchen island. Elaine was sipping a cup of herbal tea while aggressively typing on her phone, undoubtedly sending more hateful messages to our extended family about my supposedly toxic behavior. James was reading a religious commentary book, his reading glasses perched near the end of his nose. They both looked up as I entered, their expressions immediately souring. "What are you doing here?" Elaine snapped, placing her phone face down on the counter. "Did you finally come to your senses? Are you here to apologize for the absolute disaster you caused at church yesterday?" I walked directly up to the kitchen island. I did not say a word. I simply unclasped the manila envelope, pulled out the thick stack of legal documents, and slammed them down onto the polished granite surface. The loud smack echoed sharply in the large open room, causing both of my parents to physically jump in their seats. "I am not here to apologize," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "I am here to show you exactly what your self-made golden child has been doing behind your backs. Read it." James frowned, taking off his reading glasses and picking up the first page. "What is this nonsense, Charmaine? We are not interested in looking at your bank statements to prove a point." "It is not my bank statement," I replied. "It is a commercial bridge loan for $250,000, with a predatory interest rate of 35%, originating from an unregulated shadow lender." Elaine scoffed, rolling her eyes. "So what? Trey is a businessman. Businessmen take out loans to scale their operations. You are just upset that he found another way to fund his empire without your controlling money." "Turn to the last page, Mom," I instructed coldly. "Look at the guarantor's signature line." James flipped past the dense legal jargon and stopped abruptly at the final page. His eyes scanned the bottom of the document. I watched his face, closely waiting for the righteous anger of a moral pastor to take over. I waited for the shock, the outrage, the realization that their beloved son was a criminal. James stared at my printed name and the flawless digital replication of my signature right beneath it. He blinked once, then twice. "Trey forged my signature at 6 o'clock this morning," I stated clearly, letting the reality of the situation fill the silence. "He committed federal wire fraud and aggravated identity theft to secure $250,000. He tied my pristine credit profile and my personal assets to a loan shark because his fake rental car company has absolutely zero liquid capital. He is facing federal prison, Dad." The kitchen went completely silent. The only sound was the low hum of the expensive stainless steel refrigerator. I watched my parents process the information. I expected horror. I expected them to finally break down and admit that Trey was out of control, that they had enabled a monster. Instead, James slowly placed the documents back onto the granite counter. He took a deep breath, rubbed his temples, and looked up at me with an expression that was not horrified, but profoundly annoyed. "Well," James sighed heavily, "why did you force him to do this?" I stared at him, genuinely wondering if I had misheard. "Excuse me." You backed him into a corner. Charmaine James argued, his voice rising with defensive anger. You humiliated him in front of the entire church. You let those repo men take his vehicles. What did you expect him to do? He is trying to save his business. He just borrowed your good name because you gave him no other choice. Borrowed my good name. I repeated, the absolute absurdity of the phrase burning in my throat. He did not borrow my name. He stole my legal identity to secure a predatory loan. That is a felony. Elaine slammed her hand down on the counter. Do not use that word in this house. My son is not a felon. He made a mistake under extreme pressure that you deliberately caused. You have all that money sitting around hoarding it for yourself while your own brother is drowning. You could easily pay this off right now and make it all go away. I looked back and forth between them. The delusion was so deeply entrenched that it was practically an architectural feature of their minds. They were completely incapable of holding Trey accountable. In their twisted reality, the victim was the villain, and the criminal was just an ambitious boy who had been misunderstood. You want me to pay off $250,000 to a loan shark to cover up a federal crime? I asked, my voice deadly quiet. You owe him that much after what you did yesterday, Elaine yelled, tears of manipulative anger suddenly welling up in her eyes. How can you be so heartless? Do you know what the justice system does to young black men in this country? Do you want to see your own flesh and blood locked in a cage? You want to see him ruined by the system just so you can feel superior? You are a monster. He ruined himself. I shot back, finally letting a fraction of my anger bleed into my voice. The system did not forge my signature. The system did not lease cars he could not afford. The system did not lie to his family, his church, and his wife about being a millionaire. Trey did that. And you two stood by and applauded him while he did it. James stood up from his tall bar stool, drawing himself up to his full height. He used the exact same intimidating posture he used behind the pulpit when he wanted to command total obedience from his congregation. We are not going to stand here and point fingers, he declared authoritatively. The money is already in his account. The loan is active. What is done is done. We need a solution. And we need it immediately before this lender causes real problems. James reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out a sleek silver pen. He clicked it open and pushed it across the granite island toward me, tapping the thick legal document with his index finger. Sign a retroactive approval, James commanded. I looked at the pen, then at my father's stern, unyielding face. If you sign a sworn affidavit stating that you gave him verbal permission to act as your proxy, the forgery charge disappears. James explained rapidly, slipping smoothly into crisis management mode. It becomes a legal consensual guarantee. Then you contact this lender, pay the principal balance to close the account, and we never speak of this again. We will protect the family name. We will protect Trey's marriage to Vanessa. You will do this, Charmaine. It is your duty as his older sister. Elaine nodded vigorously, wiping a stray tear from her cheek. It is the Christian thing to do. Forgive him, fix it, and move on. I stared at the silver pen lying on the counter. It represented every single time I had ever been asked to shrink myself for their comfort. It represented the pale blue bedroom I never wanted. It represented the straight-A report cards that were completely ignored. It represented the $80,000 I had quietly handed over out of a misplaced sense of duty. They wanted me to sign away my dignity, my legal protection, and my hard-earned wealth, all to maintain the illusion of their perfect family. I reached out slowly and picked up the silver pen. James let out a small, heavy sigh of relief. Elaine's shoulders relaxed. They thought they had won. They thought the old Charmaine, the desperate approval-seeking daughter, had finally resurfaced to clean up another one of Trey's massive messes. I held the pen over the blank space at the bottom of the document. Then, I closed my fist around it and dropped it directly into the open trash can sitting next to the kitchen island. No, I said. James's face flushed with immediate fury. What did you just do? Pick that pen up right now and sign that paper. I am not signing anything, I said, picking up the forged documents and sliding them smoothly back into the manila envelope, and I am certainly not paying off a predatory loan shark. You are going to let him go to jail. Elaine shrieked, her voice echoing painfully off the high ceilings. You are going to destroy your brother's life over a piece of paper. I looked at my mother, feeling absolutely nothing but a deep, profound pity. I am not going to destroy his life, Mom. I am just going to stop protecting it. You wanted a self-made man. Now you get to watch him navigate the consequences of his own actions. I turned my back on them and walked purposefully toward the grand foyer. James's heavy footsteps followed right behind me. Charmaine James roared, his voice shaking with a terrifying mix of rage and absolute panic. If you walk out that door and call the police on your brother, you are no longer a part of this family. I will completely disown you. You will have no father. You will have no mother. We will cut you out completely. I stopped with my hand resting on the brass handle of the heavy front door. I turned my head slightly, looking over my shoulder at the man who had spent his entire life prioritizing his ego over his own daughter. Dad, you cannot fire someone who already quit, I said softly. I am not calling the police today. I am going to handle this my own way. What does that mean? James demanded. James, his face pale and sweating. What are you going to do? I opened the heavy mahogany door, letting the warm afternoon air flood into the suffocating house. You will find out very soon, I replied. Tell Trey to check his mail. I walked out, pulling the door shut behind me with a solid, echoing thud. I did not wait to hear their protests. I walked down the wide driveway, got back into my sedan, and pulled out onto the quiet suburban street. My phone was already in my hand. I dialed Julian's secure number. He answered on the first ring. Are we moving forward, Charmaine? Julian asked immediately. Yes, I said, watching my parents' massive estate shrink in the rearview mirror. Execute the purchase of the loan. Do it fast and do it quietly. I want full ownership of his debt by tomorrow morning. It is time to let the trap snap shut. As I drove back toward the city, the adrenaline slowly faded, replaced by a calm, calculated focus. The betrayal stung, of course it did. Hearing my own mother accuse me of ruining a young black man when she was actively protecting a criminal who had victimized her daughter was a profound psychological blow, but it was also the final piece of closure I needed. Any lingering guilt I might have harbored about my incoming retaliation had been completely erased on that granite kitchen island. Trey had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed, but my parents had drawn the map, paved the road, and handed him the keys to cross it. They were all complicit. And in the world of high-stakes venture capital, complicity was not an excuse. It was a liability. I pressed my foot harder on the gas pedal, the engine of my unassuming sedan purring steadily. The emotional warfare was officially over. The financial execution had begun. While my financial traps were quietly snapping into place across the city, the illusion of Trey's elite luxury rentals was rapidly disintegrating from the inside out. The sleek glass-fronted office space Trey leased in Midtown Atlanta, purely for appearances, had turned into a suffocating pressure cooker. It was Tuesday morning and the air conditioning was broken, but Trey was sweating for entirely different reasons. Monday had been a blur of frantic phone calls, ignored emails, and desperate attempts to secure temporary capital. Tuesday, however, was payday. Trey sat behind his massive rented mahogany desk, staring at a laptop screen that displayed nothing but frozen accounts and negative balances. The automated repossession from Sunday had triggered a cascading failure. The commercial dealership had officially terminated their contract, meaning the few luxury sedans he still possessed were currently being tracked by GPS for imminent recovery. But the immediate crisis standing right outside his frosted glass office door was much more volatile than any bank: his drivers. 4 heavily built men dressed in the sharp black suits Trey mandated for his VIP chauffeurs pushed open the office door without knocking. Leading the group was a veteran driver named Andre, a man who did not tolerate disrespect and certainly did not tolerate missing paychecks. Andre slapped a folded invoice directly onto Trey's desk. The sharp smack made Trey physically flinch. "We are done waiting," Andre said, his deep voice leaving zero room for negotiation. "It is Tuesday at noon. My direct deposit was supposed to hit at midnight. The other guys have not seen a single cent either. We are not doing another run to the airport until our money clears the bank." Trey forced a stiff, arrogant smile, desperately trying to project the authority he no longer possessed. "Come on, Andre. You know how these corporate bank accounts operate. We just switched our merchant processing system over the weekend. There is a slight delay with the wire transfers. I will have accounting expedite the checks by tomorrow morning. There is no accounting department, Trey. It is just you sitting at that desk sweating through your designer shirt, another driver snapped, stepping forward. We all saw the video of your cars getting towed at the church on Sunday. Everyone in Atlanta saw it. You are broke. Trey stood up, his face flushing with defensive anger. That was a clerical error with the leasing agency. It has already been resolved. I am running a multi-million-dollar enterprise here. Do you really think I cannot cover a few measly payroll checks? Andre leaned over the desk, invading Trey's personal space. I think you are a fraud playing dress-up. And if I do not have my $4,000 in cash by 5 o'clock today, I am taking everything I know straight to the local blogs. I will tell the gossip sites exactly how Trey's Elite operates. I will tell them about the bounced checks, the fake VIP lists, and how your own sister cut off your allowance in front of the whole congregation. Your reputation in this city will be permanently destroyed. The threat hit Trey like a physical blow. The only thing he valued more than money was his image. If the drivers exposed the inner workings of his failed company to the ruthless Atlanta gossip blogs, he would become a permanent laughingstock. He would be exiled from every high society event and elite networking circle he had painstakingly crawled into. Okay, Trey said rapidly, raising his hands in surrender, his fake confidence completely shattering. Do not go to the blogs. I am finalizing a massive private bridge loan today. The capital is completely secured. I will get you your cash by the end of the day. Just give me until 5 o'clock. Andre stared at him for a long, heavy moment before tapping the desk twice. 5 o'clock, Trey. After that, we go public. The men turned and walked out of the office, leaving Trey alone in the quiet, suffocating room. He slumped back into his expensive chair, burying his face in his trembling hands. He had secured the fraudulent $250,000 loan by stealing my identity. But that money had instantly been swallowed by aggressive private lenders he already owed. He was completely out of options, out of time, and dangerously out of cash. Across town, inside their heavily mortgaged luxury townhouse, Vanessa was fighting her own desperate battle to maintain the illusion of their perfect life. Following the absolute disaster of Sunday's church livestream, she had lost over 5,000 followers. Her comment sections were flooded with people mocking the repossession and calling her husband a broke scammer. She had spent the entire weekend aggressively deleting comments and blocking users, but the digital bleeding simply would not stop. She needed a distraction. She needed a massive flex to prove to the internet that they were still wealthy and unbothered. She had a lucrative sponsored post scheduled for a high-end luxury hair extension company. The creative brief specifically required her to showcase an extravagant, wealthy lifestyle. Vanessa marched up the spiral staircase to her massive custom walk-in closet, determined to stage the perfect photo shoot. She mentally assembled her outfit, a silk slip dress, imported heels, and her ultimate status symbols, her collection of authentic Hermes Birkin bags. She walked toward the illuminated display shelves located at the very back of the expansive closet. These shelves were her pride and joy. She had meticulously curated the bags over the last 2 years, demanding Trey buy them for her as proof of his success. There was the black Togo leather Birkin, the bright orange Epsom, and the rare diamond-encrusted Kelly bag. They were worth over $80,000 combined. Vanessa turned the corner and froze. The illuminated glass shelves were completely empty. She blinked her mind, refusing to process the vacant space. She stepped closer, frantically scanning the surrounding cubbies and hanging racks. Nothing. The bags were gone. Panic instantly gripped her chest. She sprinted out of the closet and ran down the hallway, yelling for the housekeeper who came twice a week, but the townhouse was entirely empty. She tore through the master bedroom, pulling out drawers and checking underneath the king-sized bed. She checked the guest rooms. She checked the downstairs coat closet. Her breathing grew shallow and rapid. Those bags were not just accessories. They were her literal safety net. In the back of her mind, she had always known that if Trey's house of cards ever collapsed, she could liquidate those bags and maintain her lifestyle for months. Without them, she was just as broke as he was. She pulled out her phone and furiously dialed Trey's number. It went straight to voicemail. She dialed again. Voicemail. She threw the phone onto the plush white sofa in the living room and began pacing the hardwood floor like a caged animal. Someone had broken in. That was the only logical explanation. Someone had bypassed the security system, ignored all the electronics and jewelry, and specifically targeted her prized designer bags. But as she paced the length of the grand foyer, a dark, sickening realization began to creep into her mind. There was no broken glass. The alarm system had not been triggered. The front door was perfectly locked. It was an inside job. And there was only one other person who possessed the security codes and the desperate need for massive amounts of untraceable cash. At exactly 4 o'clock, the heavy mahogany front door unlocked and swung open. Trey stumbled into the foyer looking completely disheveled. His expensive velvet jacket was wrinkled, his tie was loosened, and his eyes were bloodshot from severe stress. He had spent the last 4 hours driving around the city, begging former business associates for short-term loans and being universally rejected. The news of his public repossession had spread through the Atlanta elite like wildfire. Nobody wanted anything to do with him. Vanessa was standing at the bottom of the grand staircase, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, vibrating with pure rage. "Where are they?" she demanded, her voice echoing sharply against the high ceilings. Trey stopped in his tracks, looking up at her with a blank, exhausted expression. "Where are what, Vanessa? I am having the worst day of my life. I cannot deal with your complaints right now." "Do not play stupid with me, Trey," she screamed, taking a threatening step forward. "My Birkins. The black Togo, the orange Epsom, and the Kelly. The shelves are completely empty. Where are my bags?" Trey's posture collapsed. He looked away, staring at the marble floor, completely incapable of meeting her furious gaze. The silence in the grand foyer was deafening. It was the confirmation she dreaded. Vanessa let out a sharp, hysterical laugh. "You took them! You actually stole from your own wife! Where did you put them, Trey? I had to do it!" Trey exploded, his voice cracking with desperation. "I had no choice. After your stunt with the camera at the church, the aggressive private lenders I borrowed from called in my debts immediately. They threatened to break my legs, Vanessa. I needed untraceable cash, and I needed it fast. I took the bags to a high-end pawnbroker in Buckhead." "You pawned my Birkins!" Vanessa shrieked, her face contorting with absolute disgust. "Those bags were mine. They were my property. You had absolutely no right to touch them." "I bought them for you," Trey yelled back, stepping toward her, his fragile ego trying to mount a pathetic defense. "With my money. I put a roof over your head. I fund your stupid influencer lifestyle. You are supposed to be my wife. You are supposed to support me when things get difficult." "With your money?" Vanessa mocked viciously, stepping right into his face. "You do not have any money, Trey. You never had any money. You were living off your sister's credit cards like a little boy getting an allowance. You are a broke, pathetic fraud, and everyone in Atlanta knows it." "Shut up," Trey roared, his hands balling into tight fists at his sides. "I built an empire. I am a self-made entrepreneur. I just hit a rough patch." "You built a lie," Vanessa spat back, her eyes burning with cruel, unadulterated contempt. "And I am entirely done pretending. You think I stayed with you for your brilliant business mind. You think I put up with your arrogant, suffocating family because I loved you. I married you for the lifestyle. I married you because you promised me luxury status and security. You promised me I would never have to worry about a price tag again. But you are nothing but a fake." Trey stared at her, completely paralyzed. The words sliced right through his remaining armor, cutting straight into his deepest insecurities. The beautiful trophy wife he had paraded around the city as the ultimate symbol of his success had just confirmed his worst nightmare. She did not love him. She despised him. "I am filing for divorce," Vanessa stated coldly, turning her back on him and walking toward the staircase. "I am contacting the best lawyer in the city tomorrow morning. I am taking half of whatever pitiful assets you have left, and I am demanding spousal support. You better figure out how to get my bags out of pawn because I am adding them to the settlement demand." "Vanessa, please," Trey whispered, his voice trembling. The arrogant entrepreneur completely vanishing. leaving only a terrified, broken boy in his wake. Do not do this. Do not leave me right now. My drivers are threatening to expose me. The business is crashing. I need you. Vanessa paused on the first step. She looked over her shoulder, her perfectly contoured face devoid of any sympathy. You do not need me, Trey. You need a miracle. And unfortunately for you, your sister took the checkbook when she left. The heavy front door of the townhouse slammed shut, leaving Trey completely alone in the echoing foyer. Vanessa was upstairs packing her bags. His drivers were waiting for their cash. The police could be knocking on his door at any moment if Charmaine decided to hand the forged documents over to the authorities. He had run out of time, out of excuses, and out of leverage. There was only one place left to go. The only place that had consistently rewarded his failures with blind, unconditional support. Trey stumbled out to his personal car, the only vehicle not tied to his commercial lease agreement, and drove erratically toward the suburbs. When he burst through the front doors of his parents' estate, he did not bother keeping up appearances. He collapsed onto the expensive living room sofa and openly sobbed. James and Elaine rushed into the room, their faces pale with immediate concern. She is going to destroy me. Mom. Trey wept, burying his face in his trembling hands. Charmaine is going to send me to federal prison. The drivers are going to the press later this afternoon. I am going to lose everything, and it is all because Charmaine set me up to fail. Elaine dropped to her knees beside the sofa, pulling his head to her chest as if he were a wounded toddler. Hush now, Trey. We will not let that happen. We are your family. We protect our own. James paced the length of the Persian rug, his jaw clenched tight. How much do you need to clear the immediate debt, stop the repossession, and get the drivers paid? Trey looked up, his eyes red and desperate. $400,000. I need it today, Dad. If I do not have the capital cleared by the end of the business day, the lenders are going to take the company and Charmaine is going to call the police. She told me she was handling it her way. She wants to see me ruined. James stopped pacing. $400,000 was not casual cash even for a highly successful megachurch pastor. Their massive suburban estate was fully paid off, a testament to decades of collecting tithes and managing church funds, but their actual liquid savings were tied up in conservative retirement accounts. Traditional banks take 30 days to underwrite a loan, James muttered, calculating the risk in his head. We do not have 30 days. We barely have 3 hours. Then we go outside the traditional banks, Elaine insisted, firmly looking up at her husband with fierce, misguided determination. James, this is our son, our legacy. We cannot let that bitter, spiteful girl ruin his life. We have the equity in this house. We have your pastoral retirement fund. We can leverage it. We have to save him. James looked at the sprawling, opulent living room around him. He had spent his entire life building an image of untouchable prosperity. If Trey went to prison for fraud, the scandal would destroy James's career and his standing in the church. The congregation would never respect him again. He was not just saving his son, he was saving himself. I know a private equity broker in Buckhead, James said quietly, his voice heavy with the weight of the massive gamble he was about to take. He handles high-risk commercial bridge loans for clients who need immediate liquidity. They can wire the funds by this afternoon, but they require hard collateral. Within an hour, James and Elaine were sitting in a sleek, dimly lit office across from a ruthless private lender. They signed away the absolute security of their golden years without a single second thought. They took out a massive, high-interest reverse mortgage on their fully paid-off family estate. They liquidated James's entire pastoral retirement fund to bundle the cash into a single commercial loan directed straight into the business accounts of Trey's elite luxury rentals. They tied their entire net worth, their home, and their future to a failing, fraudulent company. And they did it all firmly believing they were outsmarting me. At 2:15 in the afternoon, I was sitting at my desk reviewing the quarterly earnings report of a tech startup my firm had recently acquired. The soft, ambient hum of the city filtered through the glass windows. My private line buzzed. It was Julian. Charmaine. Julian said, his tone entirely professional, but carrying a distinct edge of disbelief. You are going to want to log into the proprietary tracking system. Our algorithms just flagged a massive secondary market transaction linked to the target entity. I opened a new tab on my secure browser and logged into the firm's distressed asset monitoring software. My venture capital firm utilized a highly advanced proprietary algorithm that constantly scanned regional financial databases for high-risk commercial loans. Since I had ordered Julian to track every single financial movement related to Trey's LLC, the system had instantly flagged the new injection of capital. I pulled up the digital ledger. A fresh wire transfer of exactly $400,000 had just hit Trey's frozen business account. "Where did this capital originate from?" I asked, my eyes scanning the heavily encrypted data lines. There is not a single legitimate bank in this state that would underwrite a loan for a company currently in default. "You are correct," Julian replied. "It did not come from a bank. It came from a private equity firm in Buckhead, a firm that specializes in predatory lending. But that is not the interesting part, Charmaine. Look at the collateral section." I scrolled down the digital document. My breath caught slightly in my throat. Listed clearly under the collateral guarantee was the precise address of my parents' massive suburban estate. Right beneath the property address was a secondary liquidation clause attached to my father's pastoral retirement fund. I sat back in my leather chair, staring blankly at the glowing screen. The sheer magnitude of their absolute foolishness was almost difficult to comprehend. They had actually done it. They were so blinded by their toxic devotion to the golden child that they had willingly stepped directly into the line of fire. They had taken a fully paid-off multi-million-dollar property and leveraged it against a fake luxury car rental business run by a man who forged signatures to survive. "They bet the house," I said softly, the reality of the situation washing over me. "They bet everything," Julian confirmed. "The terms of this commercial loan are absolutely brutal. The interest rate is exorbitant, and the default clauses are aggressive. If the business misses a single payment, the private equity firm has the legal right to seize the property and liquidate the retirement assets immediately. Charmaine, your parents just tied their entire financial existence to your brother's sinking ship. Are the funds clear?" I asked, leaning forward, my mind rapidly calculating the next strategic move. "The wire transfer is processing," Julian answered. "It will hit his operating account by 3 o'clock. He will likely use it to pay off the drivers to keep them quiet. He thinks he just bought himself another lifeline." "He did not buy a lifeline," I stated, my voice completely cold. "He just bought himself a heavier anchor, and my parents willingly chained themselves to it." "What are your orders?" Julian asked. "Do not touch the new loan yet," I instructed. "Let the money clear. Let him pay his drivers. Let him feel a false sense of security. Let my parents believe they successfully rescued their precious son. The higher they climb on this ladder of delusion, the harder the fall is going to be when we finally kick it out from under them." "Understood," Julian said. "And what about the original forged loan? The one we purchased this morning?" I smiled, a sharp, dangerous expression that nobody in my family had ever seen. "The shell company now fully owns the forged loan. According to the contract, the first massive balloon payment is due this Friday. Because the moment he defaults on the loan that I now own, we trigger the cross-collateralization clauses. We will slowly let him bleed out the $400,000 he just stole from his parents. And when the well runs completely dry, we take everything." I stood up and walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window of my corner office. My parents had always demanded that I sacrifice my own well-being to ensure Trey's comfort. They had demanded I accept his abuse. Now they had sacrificed themselves. They had willingly handed over the keys to their kingdom just to spite me. It was a poetic, devastating tragedy entirely of their own making. I took a breath, feeling a profound sense of peace. The board was set. The pieces were locked in place. The trap was fully armed, and they had walked right into it with their eyes wide open. The rest of the week moved with a cold, calculated efficiency that only the world of high finance could truly appreciate. Wednesday morning, I called an emergency meeting with my firm's senior legal counsel. These were not local small-town attorneys. They were ruthless corporate strategists who specialized in navigating complex federal regulations and hostile asset acquisitions. We gathered in the main boardroom, the heavy mahogany doors locked from the inside. I stood at the head of the long table, the encrypted file containing the forged loan documents projected onto the large screen behind me. Next to it was the digital ledger showing the new $400,000 commercial mortgage my parents had secured against their home. I outlined the situation with complete emotional detachment. I explained the forgery. I detailed the predatory nature of the secondary loans. I mapped out the cross-collateralization clauses that tied the two debts together. My legal team listened intently, their expressions impassive, already mentally drafting the required contracts. So the brother committed federal wire fraud to secure the initial bridge loan. The lead attorney, a sharp woman named Sarah, summarized, tapping her expensive pen against her leather notebook. And the parents, entirely unaware of the forgery, leveraged their primary residence and retirement funds to inject a secondary wave of capital into the same failing commercial entity. Exactly, I confirmed. The brother is operating under the assumption that the new capital injection will save his business. The parents believe they are the heroes of this story, but they have effectively built a financial house of cards directly over a live landmine. And you want us to buy the detonator? Sarah said, a small, knowing smile playing at the corners of her mouth. I want to own the entire minefield, I corrected her. We are not reporting the forgery to the federal authorities today. If he goes to prison right now, the primary lender will simply write off the bad debt and the secondary lender will foreclose on my parents' house. That is entirely too messy. I want complete control over the timeline and the execution. I want our primary shell corporation to execute a hostile acquisition of both debt portfolios immediately. Sarah nodded rapidly, taking notes. We can execute the purchase of the forged $250,000 loan by the end of the business day. Predatory lenders are always looking for quick liquidity. If we offer to buy the debt at a slight premium, they will transfer the paper without asking a single question. And the $400,000 commercial mortgage, I asked? That one is slightly more complex, but entirely manageable. Another attorney chimed in. Since it was issued as a high-risk, short-term commercial bridge loan rather than a traditional residential mortgage, it is perfectly legal to acquire it on the secondary market. We will approach the private equity firm in Buckhead through a blind trust. They will be thrilled to offload a high-risk asset so quickly. Do what I ordered. I want both loans securely held under our control by Friday morning. Ensure all cross-collateralization and default clauses remain completely intact. When the trap springs, I want zero legal loopholes for them to escape through. The legal team moved with terrifying speed. Over the next 48 hours, my firm aggressively navigated the shadowy channels of the secondary lending market. By Thursday afternoon, the predatory loan shark who held Trey's forged contract had gladly accepted our premium buyout offer. The debt was quietly transferred to a blind shell corporation entirely controlled by my venture capital firm. A few hours later, the private equity firm in Buckhead finalized the transfer of my parents' massive commercial mortgage. When Julian called me late Thursday evening to confirm that the paperwork was fully executed, a profound sense of power settled over me. It was a power completely distinct from the emotional manipulation my family had wielded over me for decades. This was absolute, undeniable, legally binding leverage. I sat alone in my dark apartment, staring at the illuminated screen of my laptop. The digital files were safely locked in my secure server. The reality of the situation was staggering. For 35 years, I had been the outcast, the disappointment, the daughter who could never measure up to the golden child. My father had threatened to completely disown me. My mother had called me a monster. My sister-in-law had publicly branded me a jealous, toxic failure. But as of 9 o'clock on Thursday evening, I was legally their master. I was the primary creditor for their entire existence. The leased luxury vehicles that Trey paraded around the city. The midtown office space he rented purely for aesthetics. The sprawling suburban estate my parents prized above all else. James's entire pastoral retirement fund. It all belonged to me now. If they missed a single payment, if they defaulted by a single day, I held the absolute legal authority to seize every last asset they possessed. I closed the laptop and walked over to the expansive windows looking out over the glittering Atlanta skyline. They had spent my entire life trying to make me feel incredibly small. But from where I was standing now, holding the deeds to their entire world, they looked microscopic. The real beauty of the trap was that they had absolutely no idea it existed. As far as Trey knew, he had successfully bought himself more time. He had used the $400,000 from our parents to pay his angry drivers and quiet the rumors of his impending bankruptcy. He was likely walking around his rented office right now, chest puffed out, fully convinced he had outsmarted me and outmaneuvered the consequences of his own actions. James and Elaine were probably sleeping soundly in their massive house, secure in the delusional belief that their massive financial sacrifice had saved their precious son and preserved their pristine public image. They believed the crisis had been successfully averted. They believed I was simply a bitter, defeated woman who had lost the battle. But the first massive balloon payment on the forged $250,000 loan was due at exactly 5 o'clock on Friday evening. It was a brutal, predatory term designed specifically to force an immediate default. The shadow lender had structured it that way, and I had ensured that exact term carried over during the acquisition. Trey did not have the capital to make that payment. He had blown the entirety of my parents' bailout money on past due payroll late fees and aggressive damage control. He was completely tapped out. When the clock struck 5 on Friday, he would officially be in default. And because of the cross-collateralization clauses, his default would instantly trigger a default on my parents' massive commercial mortgage. The financial guillotine was raised, locked, and ready to drop. All I had to do was wait for the clock to run out. But Trey, completely oblivious to the massive blade hanging directly over his neck, decided to throw a lavish party instead. With $400,000 of my parents' retirement savings and home equity sitting freshly in his business account, Trey did exactly what a desperate narcissist always does when handed a lifeline. He doubled down on the extravagant delusion. He paid off the aggressive drivers on Tuesday afternoon, handing them thick stacks of cash to secure their silence and keep them away from the local gossip blogs. He immediately went back to the high-end pawn shop in Buckhead and retrieved Vanessa's prized designer bags, effectively pausing her aggressive divorce threats and bringing her back under his control. But instead of using the remaining capital to legitimately restructure his failing company, pay his overdue commercial leases, or save for his impending loan obligations, he immediately reverted to his obsessive need for public validation. He hired a premier Atlanta public relations agency. For a massive non-refundable fee of $30,000, this agency performed a very specific type of corporate magic. They aggressively scrubbed the internet of the negative comments surrounding Sunday's humiliating repossession video. They seeded local gossip blogs with sponsored articles claiming the tow trucks were simply retrieving older lease vehicles for a routine corporate fleet upgrade. And most importantly, they outright purchased him a vanity accolade, the Atlanta Business Pioneer Award. It was a completely fabricated honor, handed out at a lavish charity gala where the winners were simply the highest bidders for VIP tables. To Trey, however, it was the ultimate shield against the crushing truth. He believed that if he stood on a stage wearing a velvet tuxedo and held a crystal trophy, his reality would somehow magically align with his lies. On Wednesday morning, a private courier arrived at the front reception desk of my venture capital firm. My assistant walked into my office carrying a thick, heavy envelope made of expensive black cardstock, sealed tightly with a gold wax stamp. I sliced it open with a silver letter opener. Inside was a VIP all-access pass to the Atlanta Business Pioneer Gala, scheduled for that very Saturday night at the most expensive luxury hotel in downtown Atlanta. Right on cue, my personal phone buzzed on my desk. It was a new voicemail from my mother, Elaine. I pressed play, putting the phone on speaker so the clear audio filled my quiet, expansive office. Charmaine Elaine's voice rang out, dripping with a sickening blend of smug satisfaction and artificial piety. I know you received the gala invitation. Your father and I expect you to be there. We want you to come and see what real success looks like. Despite you trying your absolute hardest to ruin him, your brother has thrived. God honors the faithful, Charmaine. Trey stepped out on faith, and now he is being recognized as a pioneer in this city. You should come and take notes. Maybe seeing him shine will cure you of that bitter, toxic jealousy you hold on to. We will see you Saturday. I deleted the voicemail, a quiet, cold laugh escaping my lips. The absolute hubris of the woman was breathtaking. She was openly mocking me, completely unaware that the very foundation of her arrogant confidence was a high-interest commercial loan secured by her own beloved home, a loan that I currently owned in full. They were dancing wildly on the edge of a jagged cliff, completely blindfolded, and aggressively mocking the only person holding the safety rope. But the true masterpiece of their spectacular self-destruction arrived on Friday afternoon. The first massive balloon payment on the forged $250,000 loan was scheduled for automatic withdrawal at exactly 5 o'clock. This payment was crucial. It was $50,000 specifically designed by the original predatory lender to ensure immediate liquidity or trigger an instant catastrophic default, since my shell corporation had acquired the loan. That $50,000 was scheduled to drop directly into my firm's holding account. At 4:45, Julian walked briskly into my office. He did not sit down. He simply stood in front of my large mahogany desk, holding a sleek digital tablet. "Are we watching the wire transfer?" Julian asked, his eyes sharp and entirely focused on the impending deadline. I nodded, turning my large computer monitor so we could both clearly see the live banking ledger. "We have exactly 15 minutes. He had $400,000 deposited on Tuesday. Even after paying his drivers off, retrieving the pawn designer bags, and buying his fake corporate award, he should theoretically have enough liquid capital left to cover this initial $50,000 payment." Theoretically, Julian agreed smoothly. But we are dealing with a man who prioritizes optics over basic survival. We watched the digital clock on the bottom corner of my screen tick down. 4:50, 4:55, 4:59. The silence in the room was heavy with anticipation. At exactly 5 o'clock, the banking ledger refreshed automatically. A transaction attempt appeared in bright yellow text, indicating a pending status. The automated system was reaching into Trey's operating account to pull the required $50,000 to satisfy the predatory contract. For 5 long, agonizing seconds, the screen held the yellow pending status. Then, the text flashed violently and turned blood red. Declined. Insufficient funds. Julian let out a low, sharp whistle. He missed it. The balloon payment just bounced. I leaned forward in my leather chair, my brow furrowed in genuine disbelief. How is that mathematically possible? Where did the rest of the $400,000 go? Pull his detailed transaction history for the last 48 hours. Julian tapped the screen of his tablet, accessing the back-end financial data our algorithms had already scraped. He scanned the recent expenditures, his expression shifting rapidly from professional curiosity to utter, undeniable disgust. "You are not going to believe this," Charmaine, Julian said, shaking his head slowly. Yesterday afternoon, a massive wire transfer for $42,000 cleared his operating account. The designated payee is a high-end luxury jeweler located in the Buckhead shopping district. I stared at Julian, the sheer absurdity of the situation sinking deep into my mind. A jeweler. I quickly picked up my phone and opened Vanessa's Instagram page. She had recently posted a brand new photo just hours ago. It was a close-up shot of her wrist resting casually on the leather steering wheel of her husband's car. Wrapped tightly around her wrist was a brand new, fully customized, diamond-encrusted Audemars Piguet watch. The caption beneath the photo read, "Early celebration gift from my amazing husband for his huge award this weekend. When he wins, we all win. Blessed lifestyle. God is good." I dropped the phone onto my desk, the heavy thud echoing in the quiet room. He took the bailout money my parents mortgaged their entire future to give him the exact money meant to save his business from total legal collapse, and he let his vain wife spend it on a diamond watch to wear to his fake award ceremony. He bought the watch to keep her from filing the divorce papers she threatened him with on Tuesday. I concluded the entire pathetic, tragic picture, finally coming into crystal clear focus. He prioritized his fragile ego and his fake marriage over his binding legal debt obligations. Julian locked his tablet, his posture straightening into a rigid, fiercely businesslike stance. "The motive does not matter to the bank, Charmaine. All that matters is the cold, hard math. The balloon payment has officially bounced. The standard 48-hour grace period does not exist on these predatory contracts. As of 5:01 this evening, Trey's Elite Luxury Rentals is legally in default on the $250,000 loan. And because of the cross-collateralization clause we meticulously maintained during the acquisition, I added my voice cold, calm, and incredibly precise. Exactly. Julian confirmed, his eyes locking with mine. His immediate default on the forged loan instantly triggers an automatic default on the $400,000 commercial mortgage. Your parents are now legally in default as well. The entire financial structure has completely collapsed. The trap was officially sprung. There was no more waiting. There was no more positioning pieces on the chessboard. The game was effectively over, and I held the ultimate winning hand. Julian looked at me, waiting for the final definitive command. How do you want to proceed? Do we issue the standard default notices via certified mail? Do we send the repo agents to his Midtown office on Monday morning? No, I said, standing up from my desk and smoothing the front of my tailored navy suit jacket. I am not sending a piece of paper in the mail. My family values public appearances more than anything else in the entire world. They worship blindly at the altar of public opinion. If I send them a private legal notice, they will just try to manipulate me behind closed doors. They will cry, they will beg. And they will try to use my father's pastoral standing or my mother's fake tears to force me into submission. I picked up the thick black cardstock invitation to the Atlanta Business Pioneer Gala and tapped it against the smooth surface of my desk. They want me to come see what real success looks like. I said, a dangerous, unwavering resolve settling deep into my bones. They want me to watch him stand on a stage and receive a fake award funded entirely by their stolen retirement money. So, that is exactly what I'm going to do. I am going to gracefully accept their generous invitation. Julian smiled, a sharp, predatory expression that perfectly matched my own. Do you want me to coordinate with the legal recovery team immediately? Yes, I ordered, my voice ringing with absolute authority. Contact the Fulton County Sheriff's Department Fraud Division right now. Tell them we have concrete, undeniable evidence of a federal felony and an active, finalized default on $650,000 of secured commercial debt. Have the forensic auditors prep the seizure documents. I want a full fleet of flatbed tow trucks gassed up and ready to move on my exact command. Julian nodded firmly, his hand already reaching for his phone. And when exactly will you give the command? I looked down at the crushed gold wax seal on the VIP invitation, imagining my mother's smug face as she sealed it. Saturday night, I replied coldly, right in the middle of his pathetic acceptance speech. Julian did not waste a single second. Early Saturday morning, while my mother was likely getting her hair styled, and Vanessa was undoubtedly booking a professional makeup artist for her social media cameras, I walked through the heavy glass doors of the Fulton County Sheriff's Department. I was not alone. I was flanked by Julian, my lead corporate attorney Sarah, and two of our top forensic accountants. We did not wait in the public lobby. We were escorted directly into the secure office of Detective Harrison, the head of the white-collar fraud division. Harrison was a seasoned investigator who had seen every type of corporate embezzlement and financial scam Atlanta had to offer. But when my team laid the thick, meticulously organized binders of evidence onto his metal desk, even he was genuinely stunned by the sheer brazen stupidity of my brother's actions. I sat across from him and walked him through the entire timeline with absolute precision. I started with the original commercial line of credit I had provided and subsequently revoked. Then I handed him the IP address logs our tech team had legally acquired, proving definitively that the $250,000 fraudulent loan application was submitted directly from the wireless network inside Trey's leased Midtown office. Finally, I placed the high-resolution digital analysis of the forged signature right in front of him. I showed him the original character reference document I had signed 3 years prior, and then the overlaid transparent image proving the signature on the predatory loan was an exact pixel-perfect digital copy. It was irrefutable. There was no room for Trey to claim a misunderstanding or a verbal agreement. It was a calculated, deliberate act of aggravated identity theft and federal wire fraud. Detective Harrison closed the binder and looked at me with a mixture of professional respect and grim realization. This is airtight, he said, leaning back in his squeaky leather chair. We usually have to spend months subpoenaing bank records to build a case this solid. You have essentially handed us a fully completed investigation on a silver platter. The dollar amount elevates this to a major felony. I will have a judge sign the arrest warrant by noon today. I leaned forward, resting my hands firmly on his desk. Detective, I am not just the victim of the identity theft. My firm also legally acquired the debt portfolio. Trey's business officially defaulted yesterday at exactly 5 o'clock. We hold the legal right to seize all corporate assets immediately. We have a fleet of commercial tow trucks and a private recovery team ready to move. I want to coordinate our asset seizure with your arrest warrant. I want it all to happen simultaneously. Harrison raised an eyebrow. You want to execute a coordinated takedown. Where exactly is the target going to be tonight? He will be standing on a stage at the Grand Marquis Hotel in downtown Atlanta, accepting a purchased business award in front of hundreds of people. I replied, my voice perfectly steady. I want your officers walking through the ballroom doors exactly when he raises that trophy. Harrison looked at the evidence, then at my legal team, and finally back at me. He nodded slowly. We will stage our units 2 blocks away from the hotel. Give your recovery team the green light to move on the vehicles in the valet lot. Once the perimeter is secured, we will move in and make the arrest. I stepped out of the police precinct into the bright Saturday morning sunlight. Julian was already on his phone executing the logistical nightmare with flawless precision. He contacted our preferred commercial recovery agency. These were not the standard repo men who had shown up at the church. This was an elite, tactical asset recovery team accustomed to seizing private jets and multi-million-dollar yacht portfolios. Julian ordered 5 heavy-duty flatbed trucks to stage in a discreet alleyway near the Grand Marquis Hotel by 7 o'clock that evening. They were instructed to wait for my direct signal. Once I gave the word, they would swarm the VIP valet lot and chain down every single luxury vehicle registered to Trey's elite. The trap was not just set. It was locked, loaded, and aimed directly at the heart of their fragile fake empire. I dismissed my team, thanking them for their relentless work over the past few days. I got into my unassuming sedan and drove back to my Buckhead penthouse. The legal and financial preparations were complete. Now it was time to prepare the optics. For 35 years, my family had weaponized my appearance against me. Growing up in our affluent Connecticut suburb, Elaine had constantly compared me to the other wealthy girls in our social circle. When I refused to wear flashy designer labels or carry ostentatious handbags, she accused me of intentionally embarrassing the family. When we moved to Atlanta, the criticism only intensified. Vanessa and Trey treated my sensible flats and simple black dresses as undeniable proof of my supposed failure in life. They mocked my older car. They sneered at my lack of visible jewelry. They genuinely believed that because I did not wear my wealth on my sleeve, I simply did not have any. They mistook my financial discipline for poverty. Tonight I was going to correct that misconception permanently. I did not go to a standard department store. I had my personal assistant contact a highly exclusive private stylist who catered exclusively to Atlanta's ultra-high net worth individuals. By 2 o'clock in the afternoon, my penthouse living room was transformed into a high-end boutique. Racks of couture gowns, velvet-lined trays of authentic diamond jewelry, and rows of imported Italian shoes filled the space. A professional makeup artist and hairstylist unpacked their kits on my dining room table. I told the styling team exactly what I wanted. I did not want to look like Vanessa, desperately dripping in loud logos and screaming for attention. I did not want to look like my mother, hiding behind heavy, archaic fabrics and outdated displays of church wealth. I wanted to look like absolute, untouchable power. I wanted to look like the woman who owned the ground they walked on. The stylist pulled out a custom midnight blue silk gown. It was a masterpiece of minimalist design. It had long, elegant sleeves, a high boat neckline, and a structured, tailored fit that moved with fluid grace. There were no flashy sequins or loud patterns. The luxury was entirely in the flawless cut and the heavy, expensive weight of the silk. It was a dress that commanded a room simply by existing. I stepped into the gown and the stylist expertly zipped up the back. Next came the shoes. I bypassed the chunky, trendy heels and selected a pair of classic pointed toe, Christian Louboutin stilettos. The iconic red soles added a fierce, sharp edge to the elegant blue silk. For jewelry, I kept it devastatingly simple. I chose a pair of flawless 2-carat diamond stud earrings and a delicate platinum tennis bracelet. Authentic, brilliant, and completely understated. The kind of jewelry that did not need to shout because its value spoke entirely for itself. The makeup artist kept my face clean and fiercely contoured, highlighting my natural features with sharp precision. My hair was pulled back into a sleek, immaculate chignon, entirely devoid of the messy, dramatic curls Vanessa always favored. When they finally stepped back and allowed me to look into the full-length mirror, the transformation was completely breathtaking. I stared at my reflection. The woman looking back at me was not the quiet, compliant scapegoat who used to hide in her pale blue bedroom. She was not the daughter who absorbed Elaine's toxic insults or James's narcissistic demands. She was not the sister who quietly paid the bills to keep the peace. The woman in the mirror was a silent partner at a ruthless venture capital firm. She was a master of corporate strategy. She was a woman who held the legal deeds to her parents' retirement and her brother's freedom. The midnight blue gown was not just a dress, it was my armor. My phone buzzed on the vanity. It was a text message from Julian. The recovery team is in position. The Fulton County units are staged and holding at the designated perimeter. We are waiting on your command. I picked up the heavy black cardstock invitation to the Atlanta Business Pioneer Gala. I traced my finger over the gold wax seal one last time. They wanted me to witness real success. They wanted me to sit in the audience and applaud while they celebrated a lifestyle built entirely on theft fraud and my stolen identity. They thought they had finally won the lifelong war they had waged against my self-esteem. I slipped my phone into a sleek black velvet clutch. I walked out of my penthouse and took the private elevator down to the lobby. I did not walk out to my older sedan. Waiting for me at the curb was a pristine black Maybach with a uniformed private driver standing at attention by the open rear door. My firm retained a corporate fleet for executive use, and tonight, I required the transportation of a true executive. The driver tipped his hat respectfully. "Good evening, Ms. Wilson. Are we heading to the Grand Marquis Hotel?" "Yes," I replied, sliding into the spacious leather-lined back seat. The heavy door closed with a solid, isolating thud, shutting out the noise of the city. The powerful engine purred quietly as we pulled away from the curb, gliding smoothly toward downtown Atlanta. I looked out the tinted window at the passing city lights. The stage was set, the audience was seated. The actors were entirely oblivious to the script change. It was time to pull the curtain down on Trey's elite luxury rentals, and I was going to enjoy every single second of the finale. The black Maybach glided to a smooth halt in front of the sweeping entrance of the Grand Marquis Hotel. The valet attendants dressed in crisp white jackets immediately stepped forward to open the heavy doors. I stepped out into the warm evening air, my pointed Louboutins clicking sharply against the pristine pavement. The PR agency Trey had hired was definitely earning their $30,000. A faux red carpet had been rolled out, leading up to the grand staircase, lined with hired photographers, snapping pictures of the local elite as they arrived. I walked past the flashing bulbs, without acknowledging them, my midnight blue silk gown flowing effortlessly around me. I handed my coat to the cloakroom attendant and walked through the massive double doors into the main ballroom. The scene inside was a masterclass in artificial extravagance. Massive crystal chandeliers hung from the vaulted ceilings, casting a warm, golden glow over the room. Dozens of round tables were draped in heavy black velvet, decorated with towering floral centerpieces and illuminated ice sculptures. At the very front of the room stood a massive stage flanked by digital screens, proudly displaying the logo for the Atlanta Business Pioneer Gala. The room was already packed with hundreds of people. Local politicians, real estate developers, and various socialites mingled with champagne flutes in hand. And right in the center of the room, soaking up the attention like a sponge, was my family. Trey was holding court near the main bar, wearing a deep burgundy velvet tuxedo with a black silk lapel. He was aggressively networking, laughing loudly at a joke made by a prominent city councilman playing the role of the untouchable corporate mogul to absolute perfection. Next to him stood Vanessa, wearing a plunging sequined silver dress that caught the light with every single movement. She was holding a glass of champagne in her left hand, deliberately gesturing wildly so that the brand new diamond-encrusted Audemar's Piguet watch on her wrist was on full display. It was the exact watch she had purchased with the stolen bailout money. A few feet away, my parents were working their own crowd. James was dressed in a pristine black tuxedo, his pastoral charm turned all the way up. He was speaking to a group of older, wealthy church donors, gesturing toward Trey with a look of absolute manufactured pride. Elaine stood right beside him, wearing a heavy emerald green gown. She was nodding along, taking eager credit for raising such a brilliant self-made genius. They looked incredibly happy. They looked completely secure in their fortress of lies. I did not walk over to greet them. I simply walked past the crowded bar, navigating through the sea of evening gowns and tailored suits, and found my assigned seat. As a VIP ticket holder, my seat was located at table 1 directly in front of the main stage. I pulled out my chair, sat down, and quietly ordered a glass of sparkling water from a passing waiter. It did not take long for them to notice me. Vanessa was the first to spot me sitting at the VIP table. Her eyes widened, scanning my sleek hair, the flawless makeup, and the understated but undeniably expensive diamond earrings. Her gaze flicked down to my midnight blue silk gown, her mind rapidly trying to calculate the cost. She immediately tapped Trey on the shoulder and pointed in my direction. Trey turned around, his confident smile faltering for just a fraction of a second before he quickly recovered. He whispered something to James and Elaine, and like a coordinated strike force, the four of them broke away from their respective conversations and marched directly toward my table. "Well, well, well," Elaine said loudly, as she approached, her voice carrying over the ambient noise of the ballroom. "I am honestly surprised you actually showed up. I figured you would be too embarrassed to show your face in public after everything you tried to do to this family." I took a slow sip of my sparkling water, setting the glass down gently on the velvet tablecloth. "Good evening, Mom. You look lovely in green." James stepped forward, placing his hands flat on the table and leaning down to look me directly in the eyes. His voice was low, carrying a harsh, authoritative warning. "Listen to me very carefully, Charmaine. We allowed you to come tonight so you could witness your brother's success and maybe learn a lesson in humility. But if you cause a scene, or if you try to embarrass him in front of these people, I will personally have security drag you out of this building. Do you understand me?" I looked at my father, my expression completely unbothered. "I am not here to cause a scene, Dad. I am just here to watch the show." Vanessa let out a sharp, mocking snicker. She leaned against Trey, crossing her arms so the diamond watch caught the light from the stage. "Please," Vanessa scoffed, rolling her heavily lashed eyes. "Look who finally showed up to beg for a job. You realized you backed the wrong horse, didn't you? You thought cutting off his credit cards would ruin him, but look at him. He is the guest of honor. He is. And you are just sitting here all alone. You probably spent your entire savings just to rent that dress so you would not look completely pathetic in front of his friends." Trey adjusted his velvet lapel, looking down at me with an expression of pure, unadulterated arrogance. "Let her be Vanessa. If Charmaine wants to sit quietly and watch me win an award, she is more than welcome. Maybe seeing a real entrepreneur in action will inspire her to do something meaningful with her own life. Just stay out of my way tonight, Charmaine. This is my night." They turned around and walked back toward their eager audience, completely satisfied that they had successfully put me in my place. I watched them walk away, feeling absolutely nothing but a cold, clinical anticipation. They had no idea that I did not need to cause a scene. The scene was already racing toward them on 5 heavy-duty flatbed trucks, currently staging in the alleyway right behind the hotel. 30 minutes later, the grand ballroom lights dimmed, signaling the end of the dinner service and the beginning of the awards presentation. A hush fell over the massive crowd as the master of ceremonies, a well-known local news anchor, stepped up to the acrylic podium on the main stage. "Ladies and gentlemen," the anchor's polished voice echoed through the state-of-the-art sound system. Tonight, we are here to celebrate the visionaries, the risk takers, and the relentless innovators who drive the economic engine of our great city. Our premier award this evening is the Atlanta Business Pioneer Award. This honor is bestowed upon a young entrepreneur who has demonstrated exceptional resilience, unparalleled growth, and a commitment to absolute excellence. The massive digital screens behind the podium flared to life. The PR agency had produced a highly stylized dramatic video montage. It featured slow-motion footage of Trey's leased luxury vehicles driving through downtown Atlanta, interspersed with clips of Trey looking thoughtfully at blueprints in his rented office. Dramatic, sweeping orchestral music swelled through the speakers. This year's recipient built his empire entirely from the ground up. The anchor continued, his voice rising with theatrical enthusiasm. He overcame massive obstacles, silenced his doubters, and proved that with enough hustle, any dream can become a reality. Please join me in welcoming the founder and chief executive officer of Trey's Elite Luxury Rentals, our Business Pioneer of the Year, Trey Wilson. The ballroom erupted into thunderous applause. The orchestral music hit a triumphant crescendo. Trey stood up from his VIP table, buttoning his velvet tuxedo jacket with practiced swagger. He kissed Vanessa on the cheek, shook James's hand, and hugged Elaine, who was already wiping away a dramatic manufactured tear. He jogged up the stage steps, waving to the cheering crowd, and walked confidently to the podium. The news anchor handed him a heavy engraved crystal trophy and stepped aside. Trey gripped the edges of the podium, looking out over the sea of wealthy, influential faces. He paused, letting the applause wash over him, soaking in the absolute peak of his fraudulent existence. Then he leaned into the microphone. "Wow!" Trey started, his voice trembling perfectly, the PR training shining through every single syllable. "I am truly humbled by this incredible honor. When I started Trey's Elite, I had nothing but a vision and a relentless work ethic. I did not have wealthy investors. I did not have a massive trust fund. I just had a dream to bring unparalleled luxury to this beautiful city. I sat at table 1, swirling the ice in my water glass, watching the greatest acting performance of his entire life. Building a business is never easy." Trey continued, his tone shifting from triumphant to deeply emotional. "You face challenges every single day, but the hardest challenge is not the market, and it is not the competition. The hardest challenge is the betrayal of the people closest to you." He paused, his eyes scanning the crowd before locking directly onto me, sitting in the front row. The spotlight reflected in his eyes as he delivered the line he had undoubtedly practiced in the mirror for days. "Sometimes as you climb the ladder of success, you realize that the people you love the most are the ones actively trying to pull you back down," Trey said, his voice dripping with righteous victimhood. "You learn that jealousy is a toxic poison. To get to this stage tonight, I had to make the incredibly painful decision to cut out toxic, unsupportive family members who wanted to see me fail. I had to protect my peace and I had to protect my empire." Elaine let out a loud, supportive amen from her table. The crowd murmured in sympathetic agreement, completely captivated by his tragic narrative of overcoming a hateful sibling. "But I did not let their bitterness stop me," Trey declared, his voice rising powerfully. "I pushed forward. I secured the capital, I built the fleet, and I proved them wrong. To my beautiful wife, Vanessa, thank you for standing by me when things got tough. To my incredible parents, James and Elaine, thank you for believing in me and supporting my vision financially and emotionally when others turned their backs." Trey raised the crystal trophy high into the air. The spotlight hit the glass, sending scattered beams of light across the darkened ballroom. "This award is not just for me," Trey shouted over the rising applause. "This award is for every single self-made entrepreneur out there who refused to take no for an answer. We are building generational wealth, and absolutely nothing can stop us now." The entire ballroom rose to their feet. Hundreds of the most influential people in Atlanta gave my brother a standing ovation. Trey stood at the podium, bathed in the spotlight, crying fake tears of joy, holding a purchased award for a bankrupt company, wearing a tuxedo paid for by a stolen identity. It was the absolute, undeniable zenith of his delusion. He was on top of the world. And that was exactly where I wanted him. The higher the pedestal, the more devastating the drop. I reached into my black velvet clutch and pulled out my phone. I unlocked the screen, opened my secure messaging application, and pulled up Julian's contact profile. I typed two simple words: execute now. I hit send, slipped the phone back into my clutch, and leaned back in my chair. The finale had officially begun. Trey stood at the center of the massive stage, basking in the glow of the spotlights. He raised his crystal glass of champagne high into the air, a picture of absolute manufactured triumph. The wealthy crowd followed his lead, hundreds of glasses raised in a unified toast to the city's newest fraudulent pioneer. "To the future of Black excellence," Trey shouted, his voice echoing through the massive speakers and bouncing off the tall walls. "To building an empire that nobody can ever tear down." Before a single person could take a sip of their expensive champagne, the heavy double oak doors at the back of the grand ballroom flew open with a violent, echoing crash. The sheer force of the impact sent a shockwave through the room. Heads snapped around in utter confusion. The celebratory orchestral music that had been playing softly in the background was abruptly cut off, leaving a ringing, suffocating silence in its wake. Marching through the open doors was not a group of late-arriving VIP guests. It was a highly coordinated strike team. Two uniformed Fulton County Sheriff deputies led the formation, their hands resting firmly on their duty belts, their faces set in grim, uncompromising expressions. Right behind them walked three forensic auditors, dressed in sharp, identical gray suits, carrying thick leather briefcases and stacks of legal folders. The synchronized sound of their heavy footsteps echoed against the marble floor as they marched directly down the center aisle of the ballroom, parting the sea of elite guests like a blade cutting through silk. Trey froze on the stage, his champagne glass hovering frozen in midair. The confident, arrogant smile melted off his face, replaced instantly by a look of sheer, unadulterated terror. He looked past the bright spotlights, his eyes locking onto the approaching deputies. At table 1, my father James stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "What is the meaning of this?" James demanded, his booming pastoral voice, trying and failing to project authority over the sudden chaos. "Who authorized security to let these people in?" I did not wait for the deputies to answer him. I pushed my chair back and stood up. My midnight blue silk gown caught the ambient light of the chandeliers as I walked calmly away from my table. I did not walk toward the center aisle. I walked directly toward the audio-visual control board positioned at the side of the stage. The young technician sitting behind the complex mixing desk looked up at me with wide, panicked eyes. He had no idea what was happening. "Step away from the board," I told him, my voice leaving absolutely no room for negotiation. I reached over the complex array of sliding dials and glowing buttons, grabbing the primary wireless microphone resting on the edge of the console. I flicked the power switch to the on position. The microphone let out a sharp, high-pitched feedback squeal that immediately grabbed the attention of every single person in the massive room. I walked to the center of the floor, standing right between the advancing sheriff deputies and the stage where my brother was currently paralyzed with fear. I looked up at Trey, then out at the hundreds of influential politicians, investors, and socialites staring at me in complete shock. "Excuse me," my voice boomed through the massive concert-quality speakers, vibrating through the floorboards and commanding absolute silence. The murmurs of the crowd died instantly. Before we celebrate the massive success of Trey's elite luxury rentals, there is a minor administrative update regarding the status of this so-called empire. As the primary debt holder of his company, I need to announce that as of 5 o'clock this evening, the business is in official receivership for defaulting on $650,000 in commercial loans. The collective gasp from the crowd was audible. It was a sharp, synchronized intake of breath from hundreds of people who had just been applauding his financial genius seconds before. The elite society of Atlanta thrived on gossip, and I had just served them the ultimate scandal on a silver platter. "Charmaine, what in God's name are you doing?" James roared, his face turning a dangerous, volatile shade of crimson. He rushed forward, abandoning his table and storming toward me. "Put that microphone down and sit back down right this second. Have you lost your mind? You are ruining your brother's night. Security, get her out of here." I ignored my father completely. I did not even flinch as he closed the distance between us. The two sheriff deputies immediately stepped forward, blocking James's path and holding up their hands to keep him back. "Sir, step away from the woman," the lead deputy ordered firmly. "This is an active and legal asset seizure operation." James stopped dead in his tracks, his eyes darting frantically from the armed deputies to me. Asset seizure. James sputtered, the reality of the situation completely short-circuiting his brain. "What are you talking about? He just received $400,000 on Tuesday. He is completely solvent." I turned my gaze away from the shocked audience and looked directly at my father. Then I looked up at Trey, who was gripping the podium so hard his knuckles were turning white. His velvet tuxedo suddenly looked like a cheap Halloween costume. Vanessa was standing frozen near the bar, her jaw completely unhinged, her hand instinctively covering her new diamond watch as if trying to hide the evidence of their massive financial crime. I reached into my black velvet clutch and pulled out the thick, folded stack of legal deeds. I held them up in the air, the bright stage lights illuminating the heavy watermarked paper and the red legal seals. "I bought your debt, Trey," I said, my voice echoing relentlessly through the silent ballroom. "Every single penny of it. The bank did not loan you that $400,000 on Tuesday. I did. The shell corporation that purchased the high-risk commercial mortgage secured by Mom and Dad's house belongs entirely to my venture capital firm." Elaine let out a piercing, hysterical scream from table 1. She clutched her chest, her emerald green gown suddenly looking completely absurd as she collapsed back into her chair. "Our house!" Elaine wailed, the horrific realization finally crashing down on her. "James, what is she saying about our house?" "I am saying that you bet your entire, fully paid-off estate on a fraudulent company." I continued, showing zero mercy to the woman who had spent my entire life tearing me down. "And worse, you tied that new mortgage directly to the predatory bridge loan Trey took out on Monday morning." Trey stumbled back a step, almost knocking over the expensive crystal trophy sitting on the podium. "You bought the bridge loan," Trey whispered into his microphone, his voice cracking, broadcasting his absolute terror to the entire room. "But that loan was private." "It was private until you defaulted on the massive balloon payment exactly 2 hours ago," I corrected him, my voice cold and surgical. "You chose to buy your wife a diamond watch and purchase this fake award instead of paying your legally binding debt. And because you defaulted on that initial loan, you instantly triggered the cross-collateralization clause on the secondary loan. As of right now, both loans are in complete catastrophic default." The room erupted into a chaotic symphony of shocked whispers. Influential investors began leaning across their velvet-draped tables, rapidly exchanging horrified looks. City council members and prominent business leaders who had just praised Trey were now actively inching away from the stage, terrified of being associated with a colossal financial fraud. Vanessa broke through the crowd, her silver sequined dress catching the light as she sprinted toward the stage. "Trey, tell me she is lying!" Vanessa shrieked, her voice shrill and completely devoid of her usual polished influencer tone. "Tell me you did not default. We just got my bags back from the pawn shop. You told me the money cleared all debts. You promised me we were safe." Trey could not speak. He stood frozen under the glaring spotlights, his chest heaving as panic seized his weak and fragile lungs. He looked down at his beautiful wife, then out at the hundreds of faces staring back at him with absolute disgust. The illusion was shattered. The self-made millionaire facade had been violently ripped away, exposing the desperate, pathetic fraud underneath. "He lied to you, Vanessa," I said, addressing her directly through the microphone. "Just like he lied to his drivers. Just like he lied to this entire room tonight. He built a scheme using my credit and my parents' retirement. The trap had closed. My family was completely destroyed by the truth they refused to accept. Justice had finally arrived. It was the most beautiful moment of my entire life, standing there and watching them fall apart." Trey gripped the edges of the podium, his knuckles stark white. He leaned into the microphone, his breath ragged and uneven. "Do not listen to her," Trey shouted, his voice echoing frantically across the massive room. "She is insane. She is just a bitter, jealous woman trying to ruin my big night. There is no default. My fleet is fully paid for. My business is thriving." I did not argue with him. I did not need to. I simply turned my head toward the audio-visual control board and locked eyes with the young technician. I gave him a single sharp nod. The technician hit a switch on his massive console. Instantly, the giant digital screens behind the stage, which had been proudly displaying the gold logo for Trey's elite luxury rentals, went entirely black. A second later, they flared back to life, but this time they were not showing a heavily edited promotional video. They were broadcasting a crystal clear, high-definition live feed from the hotel VIP valet parking lot. The audience gasped collectively, their eyes darting from Trey to the massive screens above his head. Down in the brightly lit parking lot, the fleet of 5 heavy-duty flatbed tow trucks that Julian had staged in the alleyway had descended like a swarm of mechanical locusts. The live footage showed a team of recovery agents moving with terrifying efficiency. They were already securing thick metal chains around the axles of Trey's remaining luxury sedans. A pristine white Mercedes-Benz, the very car Trey had driven to the gala to maintain his wealthy facade, was currently being hoisted unceremoniously onto the back of a flatbed. But the main event, the vehicle that drew the loudest reaction from the crowd, was parked directly under a bright halogen street lamp. It was Vanessa's custom white Porsche. The camera feed zoomed in perfectly, just as a massive hook latched onto the front chassis of the sports car. Vanessa let out a sound that I could only describe as a dying animal. She abandoned her protective stance near the bar and rushed the stage, her silver sequined dress glittering wildly under the harsh lights. "No, no, no," she shrieked, pointing frantically at the giant screens. "That is my car. My name is on the registration. You cannot take my car. Trey, do something. Tell them to drop my car right now." Trey stood paralyzed at the podium, his mouth opening and closing silently like a suffocating fish. He looked up at the massive projection of his entire fake empire being physically dragged away. He had no power. He had no authority. The velvet tuxedo he was wearing suddenly looked like a tragic costume on a broken little boy. I stepped closer to the stage, the wireless microphone still gripped firmly in my hand. "Your name might be on the registration, Vanessa," I announced calmly, my voice cutting through her hysterical screaming. "But my shell corporation holds the lien, because your husband tied all of his business assets to the defaulted commercial loans. Every single vehicle registered to his entity is now my legal property, including your Porsche. You can walk home tonight in your designer heels." The ballroom was in a state of absolute pandemonium. Wealthy investors were pulling out their cell phones, actively recording the spectacle. City officials were whispering furiously to their aides, desperate to distance themselves from the radioactive fallout. At table 1, the horrific reality was finally sinking its teeth into my parents. James was leaning heavily against the velvet-draped table, his chest heaving as if all the oxygen had been sucked out of the room. Elaine was clutching his arm, her eyes wide with a frantic, unhinged terror. "The $400,000, James muttered, his voice barely audible over the chaos. Though the sheer agony on his face broadcasted his realization to the world. He lost the money, the house. He lost our house. Elaine buried her face in her hands and began to sob uncontrollably. The massive suburban estate she prized above all else, the fortress of superiority she had built over 35 years, was gone. It belonged to the daughter she had just mocked less than an hour ago. Trey finally found his voice. He stepped away from the podium, his hands raised in a pathetic gesture of surrender. Okay, Trey stammered, looking directly at the 2 Fulton County Sheriff deputies who were now walking steadily up the stage steps. "I will leave the venue. You can have the cars. You took the business. You won, Charmaine. Just let me walk out of here quietly and we can settle the financial details on Monday morning." The lead deputy, Detective Harrison, stepped onto the stage. He did not look at the massive screens. He did not care about the cars. He walked directly up to Trey, entirely ignoring the crystal award resting on the podium. "We are not here for the cars, Mr. Wilson." Detective Harrison stated, his deep voice carrying a heavy, undeniable authority. Trey blinked, genuine confusion breaking through his panic. "What do you mean you are not here for the cars? She just said she is seizing my assets." That is a civil matter for the recovery teams outside, Harrison replied, signaling for the second deputy to flank Trey on his right side. We are here for the criminal matter. Turn around and place your hands behind your back. The words hit the room like a physical shockwave. Criminal matter. The murmurs in the crowd instantly died, replaced by a deafening, electrified silence. Hundreds of people held their breath, completely captivated by the unfolding disaster. What criminal matter? Vanessa yelled, her voice cracking violently. He just took out bad loans. That is not illegal. Being broke is not illegal. Detective Harrison reached onto his duty belt and pulled out a pair of heavy steel handcuffs. The metallic clink of the cuffs opening echoed sharply across the quiet stage. Trey Wilson, you are under arrest, Harrison announced loudly, his voice projecting clearly without the need for a microphone. You are being charged with 1 count of federal wire fraud and 1 count of aggravated identity theft. Trey physically recoiled as if he had been struck by lightning. Identity theft! He gasped, his eyes darting frantically toward me. I did not steal anyone's identity. I am a legitimate businessman. Harrison grabbed Trey's right arm and twisted it firmly behind his back. The velvet fabric of his expensive tuxedo bunched up awkwardly. You electronically forged a signature on a legally binding financial instrument to secure a $250,000 commercial bridge loan, Harrison stated, snapping the first steel cuff around Trey's wrist. We have the digital IP logs tracking the fraudulent submission directly to your leased office, and we have the forensic analysis confirming the forgery. Trey let out a loud, pathetic whimper as the second cuff clicked into place, locking his hands securely behind his back. Charmaine Trey cried out, his arrogant facade completely dissolving into the tears of a terrified child. Tell them you gave me permission. Tell them we had a verbal agreement. Please, Charmaine, I am your brother. You cannot let them take me to jail. I stood my ground, my posture perfectly straight, my midnight blue gown brushing against the polished floor. I raised the microphone to my lips one last time. We do not have any agreements, Trey, and you stopped being my brother the day you decided my credit score was more important than my safety. You built your empire on a felony. Now you get to live in it. Harrison began reciting the Miranda rights. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. The words drifted over the ballroom like a death sentence. Vanessa fell to her knees on the stage, her silver dress pooling around her. She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking violently as she sobbed. She was completely, entirely broke. Her luxury cars were gone. Her designer bags were useless. Her husband was a handcuffed felon going to federal prison. And her perfectly curated influencer lifestyle had just been publicly incinerated in front of the wealthiest people in Atlanta. You have the right to an attorney. Harrison continued, his voice steady and relentless. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided for you. The irony of that statement hung heavy in the air. Trey, the man who had just stood on that very stage bragging about building generational wealth, was now legally destitute. He would undoubtedly need a public defender. Let us go. The second deputy ordered, grabbing Trey by the bicep and marching him forward. They walked him right down the center stairs of the stage. The crowd of elite socialites and business leaders immediately parted, creating a wide, clear path to the exit. Nobody wanted to be anywhere near him. The photographers who had eagerly snapped his picture on the red carpet earlier were now firing their flashes in rapid succession, capturing the spectacular downfall of the self-made pioneer. The bright flashes illuminated Trey's tear-stained face and the cold steel handcuffs locked securely over his velvet cuffs. As Trey was escorted past table 1, Elaine finally broke. She lunged forward, her arms reaching out desperately for her son. My baby, Elaine wailed, the sound tearing through the ballroom with raw, unhinged agony. Leave him alone. He is a good boy. He is a good boy. James grabbed her waist, pulling her back forcefully before she could interfere with the deputies. The proud, arrogant pastor was weeping openly. His pristine reputation in the religious community was completely annihilated. The visiting bishops and wealthy donors he had spent decades cultivating were currently watching his son get walked out of a luxury hotel for federal fraud. And beneath the suffocating shame of the arrest lay the terrifying reality that they had just lost their home to cover his crimes. Trey looked at his parents as he was dragged past them. He looked small, broken, and completely devoid of the arrogant spark that had defined his entire existence. He opened his mouth to speak, to offer some final excuse or beg for salvation, but the deputies did not let him slow down. They marched him straight through the heavy oak doors and out into the lobby, the heavy doors swinging shut behind them. The silence that followed was absolute. Vanessa was still weeping on the stage. James and Elaine were clinging to each other at their table, their perfect world entirely reduced to ashes. The hundreds of guests stood completely frozen, processing the devastating financial execution they had just witnessed. I handed the wireless microphone back to the terrified technician at the audio-visual board. I did not smile. I did not gloat. I did not need to. The total destruction of their toxic dynamic was the only validation I required. I turned my back on the stage, my heels clicking softly against the marble floor. I walked through the parted crowd, my head held incredibly high. I felt the weight of their stares, but it was no longer the weight of judgment or pity. It was the weight of absolute, undeniable respect. I walked out of the ballroom, leaving the wreckage of my family exactly where it belonged, behind me. The massive wooden doors swung shut abruptly, cutting off the sounds of the chaotic aftermath inside. I stepped into the opulent, brightly lit grand lobby of the hotel. It was a stark contrast to the dark, dramatic ballroom I had just left. A few hotel guests and staff members were milling about, casting curious glances my way, completely unaware of the financial earthquake that had just leveled my family's entire existence a few dozen feet away. I walked steadily toward the main exit, my Christian Louboutin heels echoing sharply against the polished marble floor. I did not feel the crushing weight of guilt or the suffocating burden of familial obligation that had defined my life for 35 years. I felt incredibly light. The toxic poison had been cleanly and efficiently amputated. Charmaine, wait. Stop right there. Stop. The desperate, agonizing scream echoed through the lobby. I stopped, but I did not turn around. The frantic, heavy footsteps of my parents echoed behind me, rapidly closing the distance. James and Elaine had managed to tear themselves away from the horrifying spectacle in the ballroom, chasing after the only person left in the world who could potentially save them from total ruin. They ran around to face me, physically blocking my path to the grand revolving doors. They looked absolutely unrecognizable. The arrogant, untouchable megachurch pastor and the smug, judgmental society wife were completely gone. In their place stood two terrified, broken people whose entire universe had just collapsed. Elaine's expensive emerald green gown was wrinkled and stained with her tears. James's pristine tuxedo jacket hung loosely on his shoulders, his face pale and glistening with panicked sweat. "Charmaine, please," James begged, his voice cracking violently. "You have to stop this. You have to call the police and tell them there was a misunderstanding. Tell them you authorized the signature. If he goes to federal prison, his life is over. My life is over. The church will force me to resign." Elaine grabbed my arm, her manicured nails digging desperately into the silk sleeve of my gown. "You cannot take our house," she sobbed, tears streaming down her face and ruining her expensive makeup. "We have lived there for 20 years. It is our home. We are your parents. You cannot do this to your own blood. We made a mistake, but we are family." I looked down at Elaine's hand gripping my arm. I did not pull away immediately. I simply let her feel the cold, unyielding reality of the situation. "Family," I repeated softly, the word tasting entirely foreign on my tongue. "Is that what we are?" Because my definition of family does not include actively participating in a criminal cover-up. I gently but firmly detached her hand from my arm. "You stopped being my family the day you asked me to accept a federal felony to protect his fragile ego," I said, my voice completely devoid of any emotion. "You stopped being my parents the day you decided my credit score and my financial stability were expendable collateral for his fake luxury empire. You did not make a mistake, Mom. A mistake is forgetting to pay a bill. Taking out a predatory commercial loan against your fully paid-off house to fund a fraudulent business is a calculated, devastating choice, And now you are facing the consequences of that choice. James took a step closer, his eyes wide and pleading. We will pay you back, Charmaine. I swear to God, we will pay you every single cent of the $400,000. Just give us time. Just give us back the deed to the house. I stared at the man who had threatened to completely disown me just a few days prior. Pay me back with what, Dad? I asked surgically. Your retirement fund is gone. You liquidated it to secure the loan. Your son is going to federal prison so his company cannot generate any revenue. And the church is going to fire you the second this scandal hits the local news tomorrow morning. You have absolutely nothing left. The absolute truth hit James like a physical blow. He stumbled back a step, his mouth opening and closing as his brain desperately tried to find a logical argument that simply did not exist. Elaine fell to her knees right there in the middle of the luxury hotel lobby. She buried her face in her hands, her wails echoing painfully off the high ceilings. What are we going to do? She cried. Where are we going to go? I looked down at the woman who had spent my entire life making me feel like a temporary unwanted guest in her pristine world. You have 30 days to vacate my property before the formal eviction notice is posted on the front door, I stated coldly, delivering the final definitive blow. I suggest you start packing immediately. I am going to sell the estate to a commercial developer next month. I did not wait for their response. I stepped around them, leaving my parents weeping and completely broken on the marble floor of the grand lobby. I walked through the revolving glass doors and stepped out into the warm, humid Atlanta night. The chaos in the VIP valet lot had settled. The 5 flatbed tow trucks loaded with the remnants of Trey's fake empire were already driving away, disappearing into the city traffic. Vanessa's white Porsche was gone. My private driver was standing right next to the pristine black Maybach. He saw me approaching and immediately opened the rear door, tipping his hat respectfully. Good evening, Ms. Wilson. How was the gala? It was exactly what I expected, I replied smoothly. I slid into the luxurious, quiet interior of the Maybach. The heavy door closed with a solid thud, completely shutting out the noise of the city and the distant sounds of my former family's destruction. The powerful engine purred quietly as the driver pulled away from the curb. I leaned back against the plush leather seat and let out a long, deep breath. The war was over. I had not just won. I had completely annihilated the battlefield. I was wealthy, I was free, and I was completely, undeniably untouchable. I looked out the tinted window at the passing city lights, feeling a profound sense of peace. The fake toxic empire had burned to the ground, and I was finally ready to build my own authentic life from the ashes. The greatest lesson I learned from this entire ordeal is that blood does not automatically grant someone the right to your peace, your sanity, or your success. For years, I allowed my family to disguise their financial and emotional abuse as loyalty. But setting strict boundaries is not an act of cruelty. It is an act of profound self-respect. You cannot save people who are determined to destroy you, and you should never have to shrink yourself to make room for someone else's fragile ego. Sometimes the absolute most empowering thing you can do is simply stop protecting toxic people from their own consequences. Have you ever had to walk away from a toxic family member to protect your own peace? Share your story in the comments below, and please hit the like button and subscribe for more stories about reclaiming your self-worth.